Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto reborn as Great Red in High School DxD. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Agurra of the Darkness, and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. The Red Rider start. Such a strange item. So small, so fragile, and yet able to call forth power that could tear the entire world apart. These thoughts echoed through the mind of one whose hands were currently wrapped around a small, seemingly metal, object shaped like a diamond. The object was colored blood red, as if it had been dipped in the substance, and had the imprint of a demonic skull with a pair of cross blades behind the skull. A strange symbol adorned the center of the skull's forehead the current holder could not identify. To any normal individual, it would be considered a low-class trinket, something a person finds in a second-hand antique shop for a nominal fee and end up using as a coaster, or simply a bauble whose only purpose is to collect dust. Yet through the gray eyes of its current holder, they saw immense power contained within the seemingly unappealing trinket. With each finger tracing across the rough iron of the item, sparks or some form of energy trickled through the skin, bringing the smallest of movements to the attention of individual. With a causal glance, the item was raised to the sky, the light of the moon illuminating all under its brilliant light in an otherwise dark evening. Fingers continued to trace the ridges of the skull emblazoned upon the diamond-shaped piece of metal, placing the thumb in the middle of the skull's forehead, right upon the unidentified symbol. Not one moment later, the finger began to apply pressure to metal center, with small cracks beginning to form, excitement building in the mysterious carrier of the item, whose eyes showed growing interest as strange red wisps began to leak from the cracks. A very small twitch of the owner's blank face revealed their intention to cause greater damage, fully intent on breaking the item. So this is where you've been hiding, I see. The holder showed no reaction, not so much as a single twitch or a goosebump. The holder's eyes were fully trained on the diamond, though the pressure upon the center had stopped. Val, your presence isn't necessary right now, leave now. The figure stepped out of the shadows, revealing a silver-haired individual in his late teens. He was clad in red pants with a black shirt and coat. His blue eyes peered down at the individual before him. You'll have to forgive me, but it's not often you show much interest in anything, thus it's cause to raise some eyebrows. Being born from nothingness, it's hard to imagine anything getting you to so much as crack a smile or twitch, Vala said, leaning against a nearby wall whilst crossing his arms, whilst the figure in the shadows barely turned to acknowledge his presence. Your curiosity is noted and understandable. Though don't you think you shouldn't be so quick to presume someone will tell you anything simply because you wish to know it? Vala only chuckled lightly, showing no hint of anger or even care towards the somewhat cold remark. Perhaps, but you've never really been one to keep secrets, especially from me. Besides, if that piece of metal in your hands plays a part in our mission, I imagine you'd reveal it to us sooner or later. So I figured, why wait? Ophis didn't respond to the retort, seeing little point in arguing with the silver-haired teen, her gaze remaining on the item in question as Vala moved closer to her. However, he quickly halted when he felt a rather stinging presence in the room, almost as if every step he took to get close stung at him, with miniature needles piercing his being. His eyes quickly scanned the room for the source of his pain and immediately locked on Ophis's form, or rather in front of her form. Managing to make his way close enough to her, he quickly caught sight of a small book before her, open to reveal one of its passages. However, Vala quickly took several steps back as he quickly figured out what the book was. A Bible? I never pictured you to have any sort of interest in such a childish tome, especially when there are certain parties present who are less that amused when in its presence. Ophis didn't respond, not so much as moving an inch, yet Vala could sense her using her powers as the book quickly opened, flipping through several pages as if the wind itself were guiding it. It didn't take long for the page shifting to cease and the book to remain open on a specific page. Vala's interest peaked. He slowly advanced toward the tome, making sure to not get too close, lest he suffer the burning pain or headaches any devil would suffer from contact with the book. Taking one fine step, his eyes were able to make out the text on the page. Book of Revelations, chapter 6, verse 3:4? Vala's expression became slightly puzzled, despite being a rather knowledgeable individual. Reading the Bible never was something he was made privy to due to his devil heritage, and generally not caring about what the age-old text stated, much less knowing each passage by heart. His thoughts were quickly interrupted by a cracking sound, causing his eyes to quickly dart in Ophis's direction, whose fingers were now tightening as he applied greater pressure to the item in her hand. Cracks actually were forming from the skull in the center, spreading to each corner of the item, whilst more red wisps appeared to leak out of each crack, the sight of which made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. What in the name of God is she trying to accomplish? Vala seemed to ask to no person in particular. At least that would have been the cause had it not been for a certain white piece of metal on his arm. It is ancient power, partner. A dangerous force that no being should ever trifle with, regardless of the reason. Albion? Vala quickly brought the white bracelet to his face as he spoke. I take it you know what that thing is Ophis is trying to break? Only small bits of information. Most of what I know is mere conjecture, and nothing concrete. However, what I do know is that the power she's releasing from that pendant is powerful and old as the human race itself and potentially older than even me. Vala's ears refused to acknowledge Albion's words beyond that point in his dialogue. Perhaps older than one of the two heavenly dragons. Consider my interest piqued, he mused. His partner, Albion, the white vanished dragon, was one of the oldest and strongest creatures in creation. Very few surpassed him in age and experience, and those that did were either beings who exist on a higher plane like God and the original Satans, or transcendent beings like Ophis. Meaning above all things, whatever was coming wasn't some run-of-the-mill demon, and likely had the potential to clash with those same legendary figures. If his curiosity hadn't already kept him from just walking away at this point, his feet might as well have been glued to the ground at this point, cause he was staying for the long haul, carefully watching as Ophis's full attention remained on the item as she prepared to speak. And when he had opened the seal, I heard the beast say, "Come and see." And there went out a horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. With each word spoken, Vala felt a haunt presence slowly descend upon him, growing in intensity, as Ophis's hand effectively crushed the item in her hand, shattering it completely, its pieces falling to the ground like crimson snowflakes. The red miasma that had been emitted from it seemingly disappeared at first, leaving only the shattered remains of its vessel. The moment, however, was brief as the pieces began to glow a violent crimson red, blood-red electric energy erupting from each fragment, as sounds resembling screams of hatred, agony, death and destruction roared to life in every direction. The sound was so deafening in terms of volume, Vala had to cover his ears. The partner of the white vanished dragon winced as the sounds ripped and tore through his eardrums, whilst sending a cold, dark chill down his spine. It's like being in the middle of a war zone. Gunfire, explosions, sword strikes, bombs, the cries of the dead and the dying? Just what in the 9 levels of hell has Ophis unleashed? A loud thundering roar seemed to answer him, as the sounds of battle and carnage seemed to quiet in response. A presence unlike any he could identify seemed to descend upon the land. Vala stared on, watching as the red energy from the fragments seems to crackle and wail, warping the air around them, before concentrating in the air above them, at least 8 or 9 feet high. The energy quickly took the shape of a blood-red orb, which proceeded to fire another red bolt of energy at the empty space, roughly 20 feet away from Ophis and Vala. The energy bolt started about 10 feet in the air before going straight down in a 90-degree angle, leaving a glowing dark red line in its wake, before halting at the ground. The red line then expanded, seemingly like opening a massive door or gateway, spreading until it was roughly 10 feet high and 20 feet wide. Vala continued to watch, finding himself growing increasingly disturbed by the sight, feeling a strange sensation emanating from the doorway. Cries of agony and pain seemed to resonate from every inch of gateway, and a foul odor spread out of it, now hanging over the area like a dense smog cloud. He actually felt compelled to cover his own nose, the stench affecting his enhanced sense of smell. It's like I'm standing in a sea of blood and corpses. Where exactly does that portal lead to? Nothing. Vala quickly turned to Ophis standing beside him, staring at the portal with her same blank expression, though if he was being honest with himself, he'd swear Ophis's expression changed somewhat, if only by a millimeter or two. Regardless, it still was something to gain the Longinus user's attention and interest. You say nothing, do you mean it in reference to the dimensional gap? Ophis only registered with a slight headshake as she continued to stare into the seemingly endless red void of the portal. You're half right, Valley, in that the portal is an opening to a void, though not the same void from which I reside. Vala raised an eyebrow at the response, finding himself more confused than before, but not clearly showing it in his body movements, so it's not a part of the dimensional, but is still a void in and of itself. Here I thought there was only one gap in the universe. Well, calling it a void isn't entirely accurate. In fact, if I were being completely honest, I myself am not 100% sure what exactly you'd call it other than a container of sorts. Container? Container for what? As if creation itself decided to abide by the sacred rule of show don't tell, Valley got his response, not from Ophis's own mouth but from the portal, or rather what he heard from the portal itself. The sound itself, despite sounding far away, still seemed to crash and bellow with the same force as a thunderclap, playing one after the other in a consistent stream of stamps. As the sound got louder, Vala and Ophis could make out a rather large shadow in the otherwise empty red void. It began progressively growing in size as it got closer, whilst its form became clearer and more defined, making out the shape of a rather large creature approaching. Though from what Vala could see, the creature was a mount of some kind, as there was a figure perched atop the creature's back, both with piercing red eyes that seemed to glare through the gateway and directly upon his and Ophis's forms. With another resounding roar, the pair reached the entrance of the gate. A single massive leg made its way through the gate, light finally shining upon it, revealing a massive hoofed appendage covered completely in thick, blood-red and ash-colored fur. These were quickly followed by a second hoofed leg, attached to a massive red torso covered by a black iron chest plate that was held up by massive red chains. The chest plate was emblazoned with a skull identical in appearance to the one on the original item. Finally the beast's head emerged from the gate, revealing a massive horse's head, similarly covered in blood-red and ash-colored fur, red eyes that seemed to glow like burning coals, whilst its head was covered by a thick mane, though not of hair, but of dark red fire, flailing in the wind similar to actual hair. The creature seemed to scan the area, slowly treading through the gate. The crimson mount released heat from its body, exhaling flames from its nostrils with each breath. Finally, the massive beast continued to exit the gateway, fully revealing its massive and frightening form upon the land. However, despite the beast's impressive majesty, neither Vala nor Ophis seemed interested in the creature, focusing instead of the figure who seemed to command the mighty steed. His form resembled a human male in his late teens to early 20s with a build and height similar to Vala's, if not a bit larger. His body was clad in black boots and pants. The pants were seemingly held up by a dark red belt, which held a metal belt buckle with the same skull emblem that had been upon the emblem, which summoned the gate. His upper body seemed to be clad in what appeared to be a very light form of dark gray chainmail armor on his torso and a metal breastplate. The armor itself seemed to extend to the entirety of his arms as bits of the armor was visible, save for his hands, which were clad in black fingerless gloves. Though it was difficult to fully assess the figure's full appearance because of the large, dark red duster jacket he was wearing, a large red hood concealing his face in blackness. Though what seemed to truly catch Vala's eye was the massive sword strapped to the rider's back. It was difficult to fully see due to its position, but from what he could make out, it appeared to be a massive, double-bladed broadsword with a handle similar in color to the rider's coat and horse. From the little of the blade he could actually see sticking out from behind his back, the blade itself was a dark gray metal, seemingly forged and sharpened with unparalleled precision, having an edge that he'd swear could very well cut his eyes if he kept staring at it. Oddly enough, the oppressive aura that had released by the gates, seemingly to grow weaker as the stranger appeared, as if shut off by some other party, though Vala merely attributed that to the gate, which had since closed once the rider and his horse had left. But yet, something seemed to linger, and it was making the young devil-slash-dragon wielder edgy to say the least. So strange, I find myself having the sudden urge to battle this stranger. True enough, I've never really been one to walk away from a fight before or even to stop myself from fighting a worthy opponent, but even though I know nothing about this individual, I find myself wanting to fight him more with every second that passes. His urge seemed to translate towards his powers, as a white and light blue gauntlet seemed to form around his left hand, gradually covering his arm and shoulder before passing over his body. As this occurred, his desire to fight growing stronger with each second that passed. Ophis merely shifted her eyes towards her ally, not showing even a hint of interest or shock in the obvious actions he was about to take, seemingly more interested in the stranger she'd called forth. It'd be wise to rethink your actions, Vala. Though it doesn't truly matter to me if you wish to fight him, it wouldn't accomplish anything. Not that you could defeat him even with all your power. Her comment seemed to fall on deaf ears as the silver-haired devil had since become completely encased in white and blue armor. A pair of massive wings appeared on his back, each holding a set of blue wings seemingly made of pure energy. Only his head remained free as he stared upon his opponent, whilst levitating off the ground. I must say, this is a first for me. Never have I met someone and felt such an uncontrollable urge to fight them. I don't really know what it is or who you are for that matter, so I admit I feel a little odd about this whole thing. But Vala's head was quickly encased in a white, dragon-like helmet as he rocketed towards the rider and his horse. At this point, all I want is to clash with you. So come on. The rider and his horse merely watched as the teen clad in armor rocketed towards them, seemingly at Mach 2. At the same time, the pair could swear they saw a massive white dragon forming behind the teen, seemingly adding to his ferocity. Yet the stranger didn't even flinch or show single care, barely raising his head to gaze upon the teen in question, who was mere inches away from him. It was in that single second, Vala barreling towards his unknown foe, his eyes caught a glimpse of something buried in the darkness of the stranger's hood. It was a pair of pure, glowing blood-red eyes. And it was in that single instance of contract that a familiar aura appeared before him. That same feeling of violence and hate washed over smashed into his form with the force of a tsunami, as if the very ocean had lifted itself off the ground and crashed down upon him, quite literally. Through some unforeseen force, Vala found himself blasted backwards, faster than he had been flying, his armor actually cracking as a result of the impact he was seemingly felled by. His form struck the ground unceremoniously, skipping between points of contact with the ground like a rock being tossed across a small pond or river. Ophis watched on as one of her most powerful allies continued to speed across the earth, waiting until he came to a dead stop which was roughly a mile away. Several pieces of stone he'd passed through now collapsed upon his fallen form, creating a massive dust storm in the process. And upon him was given the power to rob peace from the world of men. You certainly live up to the legends surrounding you. Her neutral expression became slightly sinister, smirking with a degree of wicked glee as she watched the rider depart from his steed, whilst pulling down his hood. Though I suppose I should expect nothing less from one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Isn't that correct, War, or do you still prefer the other name? Her question in response was met by the sound of the rider's hood dropping upon his shoulders, revealing the visage of a young man, his head covered in thick blonde hair, in style resembling a porcupine as a result of all the uneven spikes. Upon his cheeks were a set of whisker-like markings, making him resemble something of an animal instead of a man, made more frightening by the silted blood-red eyes he held, currently glaring upon Ophis with a look of hatred, who responded with a look of demented mirth. My, there's a frightening look. And here I thought you would enjoy the chance to stretch your legs out here on Earth. Well, am I wrong, Naruto? The now identified Naruto's glare grew harsh, his eyes glowing dark red, an aura of crimson shadow like fire appearing behind him, burning the very ground he stood upon, whilst the evening sounds were replaced by the cries of warfare and bloodshed, the cries of the dead and dying echoing across the sky. Tell me something, Ophis. His voice resembling that of an old war general containing a raspy whisper resulting from years of shouting and roars on the field of conflict. Before I kill you on this day, please enlighten me to something. As he spoke, his hand quickly grasped the handle of the sword on his back. His aura exploded in all directions, the screams becoming full-blown war cries, whilst his eyes burned with searing heat. Do you have even the faintest idea of just what you have done? The Red Rider ending, and there you go. Yes, Naruto in this story is a horseman of the apocalypse, specifically the Red Horseman, war. I decided to go with the horseman since, for one thing, Naruto's already been a devil, angel, fallen angel, member of the church, a phoenix member, fox demon, and even the son of God at one point. Really, this seemed like a nice change of pace. Also, the 4 horsemen haven't ever actually been seen in the DxD world, so that made it easier to incorporate them into the story itself and take more liberties with them and their powers. Naturally, some people might say making Naruto the living embodiment of war, which he's more or less sworn to eliminate in the manga and anime, goes against his character, and he's little more than an OC. Well, to that I say he's had less than 5 lines of dialogue, so his character hasn't been established, so keep those comments until further along. Really, this story is more an experiment with this idea, as I've had it for a while and wanted to give it a shot. Plus, I figure it might inspire more people to think a little more outside the box and try to make Naruto something other than a devil in DxD. It might not be the best story out there, but I figured I'd give it a try. Okay, well anyway, next on my list of stories is a collab with Neon Zangetsu. I'd say what the story is about, but I like to make people wait for stuff like this, so feel free to drive yourselves insane thinking about it. The Red Rider start. Ophis stood in place, smirking as if she held all the cards, not the least bit intimidated by the now identified Red Horseman, War or Naruto, currently glaring at her with unbridled fury, dark red, flame-like energy warping and whisking around his body like a freighting shadow. Yet the dragon god acted rather casually, as if only confronting a friend she'd potentially cheated in a simple game of poker or somehow managed to Shanghai into some little plot against their will. Oh wait, that's exactly what it was. Come now, War, don't you think you're overreacting just a little bit? I mean, have I really done anything wrong? The sound of several loud clicking sounds quickly echoed, as Ophis found herself staring down the barrels and muzzles of countless guns and cannons of every variety and make a person could imagine. Each weapon seemingly stacked atop each other, as if welded together by a 5-year-old who thought it would look cooler, though the somewhat silly sight was made more menacing by the dark red color of each weapon, along with the fact that there were also missile launchers and bazookas thrown into the mix. Naruto/War stared down at Ophis, every last gun locked firmly in his grip, his finger on the trigger with each barrel locked onto his target. Without so much as a second of hesitation, he pulled the trigger and unleashed hell. The sounds of gunfire, explosions and pure unhinged destruction screamed throughout the land. Rocks, earth, trees, everything within the immediate vicinity of his weapons was ripped and torn asunder by his miniature arsenal. Naruto, however, merely looked at the scene coldly, his anger surging quietly behind his stone-faced visage, an anger that was slowly building with each second that passed and every bullet casing that flew either past or directly into his face. The shootout itself lasted for several seconds and truthfully could have gone on for an eternity if he'd wanted. But the Red Rider wasn't in the mood to keep wasting his ammo, and after another few seconds of firing he stopped, smoke leaking from each barrel of his guns. He of course continued to look on through the massive dust cloud and sea of destruction he'd just unleashed, clearly not fooled by what had just happened. Well, that was certainly an energetic response. Ophis chuckled lightly, standing within the dust cloud, surrounded on all sides by massive craters, burning trees and scorched earth. Yet not a single scratch or bullet wound on her body in spite of the massive onslaught she just faced. Her eyes quietly traced over the destruction before her, watching as Naruto's guns quietly faded, reforming into the same red energy, before returning to his body. Though for the living embodiment of warfare and a master of every weapon ever created, your aim leaves something to be desired. All those shots and not a single one did any damage. Did you really think you'd kill me with those? The Red Horseman, however, merely growled as he cracked his shoulders as a larger amount of the red energy leaked out of him, quickly taking shape behind him. You seem to misunderstand, dragon. Those shots weren't meant to kill you. As he said this, the energy behind him quickly took form, revealing a massive array of cannons, specifically battleship and tank cannons, heavy artillery weapons and possibly a few rail guns here and there. The horseman himself currently situated in between the 2 largest guns, seemingly talking from a large battleship, which along with the other guns were targeted right at Ophis, ready to fire again. That was meant as a warning shot. The small dragon goddess let out a small whistle at the massive arsenal before her, still not even remotely intimidated despite the horseman now commanding enough firepower to level everything within a 100-mile radius in a matter of seconds, seemingly more amused than anything else. "Ma, you certainly like to do things in excess, don't you?" Naruto's retort to the comment was a loud cannon blast from one of the artillery guns, just narrowly missing the small dragon god by a hair's breadth, his eyes looking down with greater rage, magnified by the loud roar of the explosion he created and the red-hot flames it emitted. "I'm not in the mood for pleasantries or conversational bullshit, Ophis." He spoke with irritation, clearly not interested in having any semblance of a reasonable conversation as all of his guns seemed eager to fire. So instead, let's get right down to the meat of things. Namely, what's to stop me from reducing you to absolute nothingness for calling me here? The sounds of his guns each loading or preparing to fire helped to emphasize his eagerness to bring his second onslaught. Ophis, however, casually and without care placed herself on a nearby stone, seating herself while looking up at Naruto's form, placing one of her elbows on her knee and chin in her palm, still looking confident. Well, for starters, if you want to be threatening, I'd say it would be more effective if you weren't only using those little toy guns of yours. After all, you can shoot those off all you want. It'd be no more effective if you tried to assault me a series of water guns. Ophis continued to chuckle as Naruto grit his teeth lightly at the comment, though only doing so in admittance to what she was saying. With a casual wave of the arms, the massive gun assortment quickly reshaped back into the red energy it once was and returned again to Naruto's form as he looked on. As much as I hate agreeing with you, you're absolutely right, Ophis. I know none of my normal weapons can hurt you, and I'm not one who enjoys blowing smoke up a person's ass. Thus, his hand quickly wrapped around the hilt of the sword on his back, his red energy forming a mini tornado around his body, causing his jacket to kick up in the wind. The loud screams of war-torn soldiers and civilians howling in agony and fury, war's own eyes glowing red. Ophis actually raised an eyebrow at the sight before her, though still acted in control. You're actually willing to pull out ruin? Just to threaten me? These peaceful times really haven't done wonders for you, have they? Naruto didn't even respond as he slowly began to pull his sword from his back, the red energy around him increasing in size, speed and intensity with each centimeter it grew free. Let's try to stay on topic, shall we? Now I'll ask this one more time, and please consider your response very, very carefully. Why, on this or any other plane of existence, should I not take out my sword and obliterate your very existence down to the last molecule and electron? Ophis only frowned at his response, shaking her head calmly as she jumped off her seat, always so impatient. You'd figure someone with all your experience would have learned the value of patience. More to the point, do you really think you can threaten me? You and I both know that as strong as you are, you still come up short compared to me. The horseman merely growled in response. I think I'll take my chances. Besides, it's not like you can kill me, so really you don't have much to threaten me with either. Ophis stared blankly at the rider. Honestly, I'd figure you'd be far more cooperative. This little offer I have would actually give you a shot at several members of the three factions. Certainly you'd love nothing more than to wipe a few of them out, wouldn't you? The blonde horseman didn't seem to resonate well with the response, hands still firmly latched on his sword. And why on earth do you think that is a good enough reason for me to even consider helping you? If that's your only means of securing my cooperation, then I'd say you're a few cards shy of a flush, Ophis. And here I'd heard that of the four horsemen, it was the Red Horseman of War, who seemed to have an especially deep and bitter grudge against the three factions. So deep in fact he'd have no qualms killing any of their members if given the opportunity. She smirked as she explained her reasoning. You can't honestly expect me to believe there isn't some merit to those rumors. Rumors, no matter how extravagant, always have some basis in fact. Why, we ourselves are living examples of that. So you can't tell me the idea doesn't intrigue you. The horseman, however, continued to unsheath his blade, the angry cries it released growing louder and more violent. The sheer amount of bloodlust it emitted was becoming so palpable Ophis could swear she could taste it on the wind. Regardless of whatever truth there may be to your claims, I still follow the rules of Armageddon and laws of creation. No grudge I hold would make me go against those ironclad rules. Also his eyes slowly became somber, his young face more resembling an aged veteran who long since be broken by decades of battle and conflict. I'd never let any petty hatred I have blind me to where I'd willingly tear this world apart, not for any reason. His look of fury returned in full as his sword continued to reveal itself. So unless you have some other card to play, I suggest you ready yourself. Ophis could only sigh in response, shaking her head in annoyance. I tried allowing you a willing choice in this endeavor, and you spit it back in my face. Though I suppose that's part of the reason I chose to summon you. I doubt pestilence or famine would be nearly as accommodating as you've been. Still, if you're still so quick to start a fight, I guess there's no other option but to play my ace in the hole, so to speak, and make the choice for you. Her hand quickly dove into her shirt, Naruto feeling the urge to tense up at the action, but held himself back. She's not stupid enough to even try to pull some kind of weapon out against me. No matter how powerful she may be, there isn't any weapon, forged or born, that I haven't mastered. His confidence quickly drained, however, once he saw what Ophis pulled from her shirt. The item in question were three very familiar-looking pieces of metal, each in the shape of a diamond, with several intricate symbols on them. However, there were slight differences that helped distinguish them. One of the items was onyx black or just black in color, with a skull upon its face, but with an old-fashioned pair of scales behind it. The second was sickly green in color, the skull seeming somewhat rotted, with chunks of bone missing and a bow and arrow hidden behind it. Finally, the last diamond appeared bone white, or sickly pale in color, the skull sporting a single-bladed scythe behind it. Each diamond giving of an aura not unlike the previous red one, though each seemed far more powerful and frightening. Naruto, however, didn't notice the aura, instead his mind and eyes quickly seeing nothing but red, as his energy and aura literally exploded around him. His entire body seemingly changed into the same blood-red energy he summoned. The seals. Where did you get those? Ophis regained her confident grin, quietly placing the seals between her thumb and forefinger, clearly indicating her interest to break the seals, resulting in Naruto's aura quickly dying down. My, it seems the Red Horseman isn't as battle-hungry as I originally perceived, if he's so easily brought to a halt as the mere action of holding a few pieces of metal. Then again, I'd be more than happy to comply with your request and even have a pleasant discussion, if you would be a little more accommodating. To emphasize her point, Ophis applied a slightly heavier amount of pressure on the 3 seals, not enough to break them or anything of the like, but enough to get the horseman to release his hold on his sword. But his aura still remained strong. Are you really willing to play this little game, Ophis? You and I both know what'll happen if you break those seals. After all, my brothers aren't like me, they don't believe in things like patiences, mercy or proportionate response. And I know they'd soon face extinction than bow down to you. Hell, famine and pestilence would sooner ravage the planet than listen to your. And I know you're not so arrogant to think you could control my oldest brother. He doesn't bow to anyone, least of all you. Ophis actually seemed to agree with his words, only meriting a carefree smirk on her face as she placed the seals between her 2 hands. You'd be right in your assumption. Your 2 older brothers are a pair of loose cannon catastrophes I couldn't hope to control through any means. And you last brother, well, my reasons for not summoning him are self-explanatory. Her smile quickly shifted to a more manipulative smile, reminiscent of a criminal mastermind, which is why I chose to summon you specifically. You're the only horseman who has any semblance of honor, and the only one who isn't so blood-hungry that he wouldn't just set this entire planet on fire for shits and giggles. She then slowly began to slip each of the seals into her shirt, save one of them to act as insurance. Of course, this wouldn't work so well, if it wasn't for the rather ironic fact that the Red Horseman, War himself, actually wants to see this world thrive, as opposed to how most would believe you to act, namely being all for watching mankind and the 3 factions tear themselves apart. The Red Horseman quickly dropped his aura, seeing himself backed into a corner, with few options left, all the while clenching his hands in frustration. Just tell me what you want already, Ophis. You know I won't attack at this point, and you've got the edge, so why don't you stop beating around the bush already and tell me what you want? Ophis almost smiled at the declaration, check and mate. She thought victoriously before deciding to comply with his request. Alright, War, remember, as long as you comply with my orders, I promise the seals won't be broken and the human race can continue to exist for the next several millennia without fear. The Red Horseman almost stomped his foot in frustration, at practically being tied around the dragon god's finger at this point in time. However, the risk was too great, and she had the edge in this fight. Namely, he had something to lose from this, while she technically didn't have anything, since Ophis' nihilistic personality made it where she all but didn't care about her own life, at least not enough to fear death. So calmly taking a breath, the Red Horseman quietly took a seat on a nearby wall, his red eyes glaring at Ophis as he crossed his arms. Very well, Ophis. I will concede for now since I appear to have my hands tied. Why don't you just tell me what exactly it is you want? The dragon god, seeing she'd won, quietly put the remaining seal back into her shirt, and quietly made her way over to War. Glad to see you're finally being reasonable. Quickly taking a seat on a wall adjacent to War, the young-looking dragon faced the frustrated horseman. Now then, let's start off this conversation with a simple question. I trust you're familiar with the dragon known as the Great Red. Considered the oldest and strongest dragon in existence, and current resident of the Dimensional Gap. Yes, I know a thing or two about him. Ophis oddly didn't seem surprised she'd been cut off. Well, that was a little impolite. You could have at least waited for me to finish my sentence, and I'd be inclined to allow that, but really, are you even remotely surprised? Your grudge against the Great Red is known practically by any higher-level being. Frankly, you whine and boast about it so often, you've become like a broken record. What else could you possibly want? The Dragon of Infinity actually felt the urge to lightly pout at the remark, essentially being called predictable, or just plain boring in some sense if one really wanted to stretch it. Regardless anyway, since you're so well informed, this should move things along a bit quicker. Her face and visage narrowing to an expressionless, cold glance, all humor vanishing in an instant. I want that oversized, ego-stroking lizard exterminated, so that I can finally regain my original home in the Dimensional Gap. Ophis seemed to gain a more passionate, regal tone as she spoke. Evidently this was a speech she'd been practicing, and it was no small secret how much she enjoyed just talking about killing and generally defacing the Great Red's name. Sadly, the Red Horseman wasn't the least bit amused. And you want me to what, kill him for you, is that it? The Red Rider actually started to chuckle at the notion, though it was not the funny, amused laughter of someone who was in a good mood. No, it was the mirthless, empty laughter of a borderline sociopath, or a serial killer, amplified by the red energy slowly beginning to form around him. Here's a question. You're one of the most powerful beings in creation, so why don't you get off your tiny, lazy, scale-covered, Lolita ass and do it yourself? I've made it very clear from the start, if you or the 3 factions want to rip each other apart, fine. But leave me and the rest of the planet out of your petty disagreements. Ophis only sighed at his abrasive response. I never said I wanted you to kill the Great Red. Really, a fight between the two of you would probably cause about as much havoc as the actual apocalypse itself. Actually, it has to do with a certain member of the three factions, and I don't necessarily want them dead. I believe indisposed or restrained would be the better term to describe it. Naruto merely said nothing, a single twitch from his right eye being the only indicator he was even remotely interested in Ophis's continued dialogue. The dragon god obliged, quickly reaching back into her shirt and pulling out a photograph before tossing it with a flick of the wrist into the horseman's hands, revealing the image of a 17-year-old girl with long red hair, blue eyes and a noticeable bust. Naturally, if War was actually as old as he looked, he'd probably be drooling all over the image, nose spurting blood in a comic fashion like a faucet, followed by him making some overly perverted line, and then being violently assaulted in a humorous fashion by a member of the opposite sex. Thankfully, War was far too mature for all that bullshit and simply looked at the photo with an analytic gaze. She's a devil, I take it? Correct. Her name is Gremory, heir to the house of Gremory and the younger sister of Sirzex Gremory, the current Lucifer and leader of the devil faction. Needless to say, she's a girl with quite the pedigree. Naruto again only looked at the photo with disinterest, not fazed by the girl's appearance, name, family, nor anything else. And I returned to my previous question. Why exactly does one of the most powerful beings in existence need my help to apparently hold off a female devil who hasn't even graduated high school yet? It's actually very simple. After the last Great War, relations between the three factions have been rather strained. Thus, even the slightest offense against any high-ranking faction member, or one of their families, is bound to draw a large amount of attention. The wheels in Naruto's head quickly began turning, piecing together the plan in mere seconds. I get it, you want me to essentially act as a scapegoat. Stir up waves amongst the ranks by having them focus all their attention on me, so you can settle your own little affair with minimum interference. A clever deception, I'll give you that. The young in appearance dragon god actually grabbed the hem of her dress in a fake curtsy. To receive such a compliment from a military mind as yours is truly an honor. Naturally, I know that you're more than capable of handling this task without issue, and once things are all settled, I will hand the seals over to you. The apocalypse won't be getting an unnecessary head start, and you even get to repay the three factions for their prior transgressions. Doesn't sound too unfair of an arrangement to me. The horseman, however, didn't seem entirely amused. And how exactly do I have your word that you'll hand the seals back over to me once I've done as you've asked? You don't exactly have a reputation for being the most trustworthy creature in creation. That may be, however, I don't have much to gain from stabbing you in the back, and as you've already pointed out, breaking the seals otherwise would be unwise, since the horsemen would treat me with the same level of respect as they do every other creature in existence. Though in the end, I guess you'll just have to trust my word above all else and hope I keep it. With another smirk, Ophis gave a subtle gesture, as if demanding a response. So do we have an accord, horseman? Naruto silently gritted his teeth as he nodded in response. Don't get too confident, Ophis. I'll play you game for now, but should any opportunity reveal itself to me, I will take the seals back by force and then show you the full force of what a horseman is capable of. Scene change. I am one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. A master of unarmed combat, weaponry and battle strategies, and I'm currently spying on teenagers at a Japanese high school. Nothing in that sentence sounded right. These thoughts ran throughout the horseman's mind as his eyes quietly observed the daily workings of the students of Ko Academy, a high-class Japanese school, of which his target, Gremory, was a student of. After he begrudgingly agreed to Ophis's request, he immediately demanded what information she had on the girl, primarily where to find her, leading him to perform some necessary recon on his target. Hey, you guys see that thing in the tree? I think it's a bird of some kind, maybe a hawk. Dude, don't be an idiot, hawks aren't that color, and they don't even live in this area. You really need to pay more attention in class. Naruto's gaze quickly diverted to the voice of a pair of students who'd caught sight of him, or rather his current form. Naturally, as part of recon, it's best to move in with stealth as the top priority, and while he could easily have gone in his normal form, that would require things like formulating a background, possible conversation and unwanted interaction with the target, or other parties, and in general was just too much of an unnecessary hassle. Thankfully, another one of his powers as a horseman was shape-shifting. Specifically, he could transform himself into any beast or creature ever used in warfare. In this case, a falcon, a red falcon to be specific, an unfortunate side effect of being the red horseman, but it was a rather moot issue at this point. A/N. Imagine his form being kind of like the messenger hawks from The Last Airbender, minus the whiskers and being pure red in color. With his form taken, he was currently perched on a large tree branch in the middle of the schoolyard, just overlooking the gym, with the main school building in full view. Though, with his precise gaze, he firmly locked onto the abandoned school building, around 200 yards away, Ko Academy schoolhouse. Originally abandoned almost 2 decades ago, before it fell into Gremory's control and since acts as her main base of operations, protected under the disguise of the supposed occult research club. He mulled over some of the additional data Ophis had given him regarding the Gremory girl and her activities, himself silently acknowledging a slight degree of intelligence in the plan of using a club to help disguise their unusual activities. Supernatural. It definitely wasn't the worst strategy in the world, since he'd certainly heard of stranger or dumber ways to conceal such activities. But still, a club that's so exclusive you need to be invited just to get into it, and only consists of the school's most popular, and elusive students. How have the other students not tried to learn more about the club? They must have to erase students' minds on a daily basis. Snapping from his thoughts for a moment, he focused his scope-like vision at the nearby window of the schoolhouse. A small glimmer of red quickly catching his eyes before the curtains were pulled apart to reveal his target, looking upon the school with a degree of mirth. And lo and behold, the Gremory princess makes her appearance. The girl's overall appearance was a dead-on match for the photo he'd been previously given, and even he had to admit she was a rather stunning individual. Cascading crimson red hair, bright blue-green eyes, a figure that belonged more on a supermodel than a 17-year-old. She was the object of every teenage boy's desire and every perverse older man's sick fetishes. However, he wasn't here to gawk, only to gather necessary information on the girl before making his next move. For now he was tempted to get in closer, as despite his enhanced vision and other powers, he unfortunately didn't have X-ray vision and thus couldn't see through walls. No way to get more intel without getting in closer. Just have to be cautious and avoid detection. Though frankly, this would be easier if I could just see through the wall. Really need to ask Death how he does that. The Red Hawk quickly opened up his wings in preparation to fly closer to the clubhouse, when an all-too-familiar sound resonated through his ears, causing his feathers crinkle and an unsettling chill to run down his spine. Quickly looking towards the noise in question, he let out a loud groan, which came out as more of a squawk, as he felt complete shame at the sight below him. Perverts, it always has to be perverts. Nice to know no matter where, at what time or even what century I'm in, there's always a nice little group of horny idiots, who opted to always think with their S instead of their brains. The parties who'd brought about this ire and the disguised horsemen were two young teenage students of the school. One of the teens had a shaved head and slightly athletic build, while the other had short brown hair and glasses. Physically, either was what anyone would consider attractive, either physically or mentally, which probably explained why the two were crouched down in front of a nearby wall, peeking through a small hole in the stone and giggling uncontrollably. The giggling in question was a dead giveaway that the pair was up to no good, though a quick scan from the horseman's falcon vision allowed him to peer through the window for an instant, before quickly cutting the connection off once he got the gist of what was inside. Peeping into a girl's locker room, and in broad daylight, in a massive open school area. How exactly have these ass clowns not been caught yet? His comments seemed to go unanswered as he continued to stare at the two pervs, standing in plain sight, yet none of the students seemed to even notice them. The lack of action on the part of the other students was so baffling to the horseman he actually felt compelled to break his disguise just to go down and kick their brainless asses, since it seemed no one else would. However, the falcon slowly grew a smirk on his beak, at least to where it was somewhat physically possible, as he thought of a more appropriate punishment. Might as well teach these clowns a little lesson in respecting women before I spy on the Gremory girl. I doubt Ophis will mind, and if she does, well, fuck her. With a quick flick, Naruto unfurled his wings and promptly leapt off his perch, quickly gliding towards the completely oblivious duo. He, however, quickly felt the urge to grit his teeth or lower his head in shame as he listened in on their conversations. Man, nothing better than peeping on the Kendo Club. All the nudity we could ever want, and we don't even have to pay for it. The bald-headed teen continued to chuckle, a small amount of drool leaking from his mouth along with a few drops of blood. The glasses-wearing teen nodded. Yeah, Issei really doesn't know what he's missing. In fact, he quickly adjusted his glasses, causing the light to shine on them in a way that made his glasses appear fogged up. I do believe some of the girls went up a size or two. The girls' cup sizes are actually starting to resemble my last report card, and I'm not complaining. The pair's less than pleasant actions, however, were quickly interrupted by a loud squawking sound, as a large shadow descended upon them. They barely had a chance to look up at the source before they were bombarded by an unholy assault of sharp pecks and slashes from the bird's talons, though thankfully none of the wounds were deep enough to cause serious injury. The falcon in question smiled with satisfaction as he went through his assault, enjoying the girlish screams of the two teens as he continued to attack them. For Christ's sake! Where did this freaking bird come from, and why is he so pissed at us? Who cares? He's getting in the way of our lovely date with the Kendo Club and their bountiful boobies. Quick, swat him away! Managing to gain some ground, the shaved-head pervert attempted to slap the transformed horseman away, only for the falcon to quickly ascend higher into the air, resulting in him instead smacking his friend square in the face and flat on his ass. The action in question merited a silent chuckle from the falcon, and now, for the final part of my little scheme. Without a second thought, his eyes zeroed in on the pair once more, before they began to glow a dark crimson red, each eye locked on an individual pervert. The unfortunate victim who'd been slapped was the first to react, looking up at his friend with a rage-filled gaze as his eyes glowed red. You damn prick. What the hell did you hit me for? He quickly jumped to his feet before shoving the teen onto his own ass. He in turn also looked at his former friend with red glowing eyes. Me? You're the one who didn't spot the damn bird when it tried to peck our eyes out and ended up interrupting my moment of a beautiful boob-filled nirvana. I almost reached my peak until you decided to get lazy, and now thanks to you, the Kendo Club is probably on their way with their sticks to beat our balls black and blue. The teen with the glasses gained an evil smirk at the declaration. Now there's a nice idea. The other teen gained a confused look, before his entire face tightened in extreme pain, his mouth slamming itself shut as he held his breath, trying desperately to choke down a scream. Meanwhile his friend, who currently had his foot firmly planted between his victim's legs, continued to smirk. "Congratulations, my friend. You've just been blueballed, literally." He watched on as his friend slowly fell to his knees, only letting out weak little murmurs that sounded like a high-pitched cat, though his smirk quickly died as his entire face seemed to turn blue, twisting in pain as if he just started sucking on a lemon, the end result of his downed friend landing a good solid punch right into his private area. And this is probably the closest you're ever gonna get to seeing any kind of action from anybody. Girl or boy. The pair continued to glare at one another for a brief moment, before they raised themselves to their feet, and with a loud battle cry, the proverbial ball-busting competition began. Punches, kicks, even a headbutt or two, both unleashed a hellish assault upon their most vital areas, seemingly able to ignore the pain despite the repeated attacks. Naruto meanwhile looked upon the scene with a degree of satisfaction. Well, I've managed to make possibly the two most perverted people on this campus beat their balls like punching bags. Hopefully made it so they can never conceive, and if that angry mob of girls with wooden swords approaching them is any indication, they're in for one more hearty punishment. I'd say my work here is done. With a casual nod he proceeded on his way, flying towards the clubhouse, briefly enjoying the sound of rage-filled girls, bamboo practice swords smashing against flesh, and the high-pitched screams of two boys who'd likely need to glue ice packs to their balls for the next year. It was a surprisingly soothing sound. Scene change inside the clubhouse. My, things certainly seem to be rather lively today. Nice to see that Issei's old friends have stayed active in his absence. The sound of a girl licking her lips quickly echoed throughout the room, and I must say, their screams are surprisingly delicious to listen to. I'm tempted to get a practice sword myself, and teach them the finer points of pain. The girl in question spoke with a tone that sounded more sensual than angry, making it clear her enjoyment in the other's misery was not of the typical variety. The person in question was a surprisingly beautiful and noticeably well-endowed young woman, with long black hair and a ponytail, tied with an orange ribbon, with a pair of purple eyes that screamed seduction and pain for any who dare enter. A sound of crunching echoing nearby revealed a much smaller girl, with light silver hair and yellow, cat-like eyes, a small, black cat pin holding up her hair. She herself casually observed the sounds of pain resonating across the campus, showing no interest, disgust or any emotion if you were just going by her facial expression, which was about as neutral as you could get. Perverts deserve to get beaten up. Her voice was eerily monotone, meriting a chuckle from a young boy with blonde hair, blue eyes and a Bishonen-like face. I'll admit they aren't exactly the most tolerable people on campus, though if I was being honest, they seemed a little off today. They may fight, but from what Issei's told us, they've never been known to be so openly violent towards each other, or so bad at concealing themselves, the strapping young man explained. The black-haired sadist nodded. I don't suppose it could have anything to do with the little spy we have looking at us in the window. All eyes collectively darting towards the red falcon currently gazing at them from a nearby branch, especially when you consider that falcons aren't native to this particular area and I'm fairly certain they don't come in that particular shade of red. What do you think, Bucho? There in the center of the room, sitting behind a rather expensive-looking hardwood desk, chin resting on her intertwined hands, with a calculating look on her face, was the heir to the house of Gremory and Naruto's intended target, the crimson-haired Rias Gremory, her blue-green eyes quickly locking with those of the falcon, easily able to tell from a single glance it wasn't a normal bird, beyond the observations already made. I think it's safe to assume that whoever or whatever that creature is, the fact that it specifically chose to spy on us means they must be aware of who we are or at least have some degree of idea regarding our identities. Given his close proximity, I'd say it's best to not beat around the bush, and just see what he has to say. She quietly gestured towards the window. Akino, if you'd be so kind as to allow our guest in, it'd be rude to just ignore him at this point. With a chuckle the young girl made her way to the window. Maybe we should get him a dead mouse to help tempt him in. It would be kind of silly to just open the window and assume he'll fly right into the room. The girl quietly unlatched the window and opened it up, allowing the air to flow into the room as her eyes quickly locked onto the falcon's own eyes. Naruto honestly didn't know how to react. Well, they aren't completely oblivious, which I suppose is good depending on who you're asking. Then again, given these rather peaceful times, that's to be expected. Quietly opening his wings up, he prepared to take flight. Since they know I'm here, might as well oblige them. No point in dragging this out if I don't have to. He quietly flew into the room through the window, before halting midway in the air in the center of the room, keeping himself airborne through repeated flaps of his wings. Gazing upon the Gremory girl, her servants all observing the matter rather calmly yet staying alert. I suppose introductions would be in order, though I'm thinking that would be easier if we spoke face to face, unless you'd prefer to stay as you are? The Gremory girl spoke in a regal tone, almost acting as though she were a king speaking with one of her subjects. Naruto, taking a hint, stopped his flapping as he quickly wrapped both his wings around his body. The wings in question quickly extended outwards and quickly stretched to the ground, slowly replacing red feathers with red fabric, all the while the rest of his body also transformed. The black talons on his feet quickly grew in size, slowly fusing together into a single foot, wrapped in black boots, his legs also changing into more human-like legs clad in black pants. In a matter of seconds, what was once a 3-foot-high falcon stood a 6-foot-high individual in his late teens, quickly unfurling his now reformed duster jacket, revealing his face and figure to the world. blue eyes looking upon the parties in question with interest, though his focus was primarily directed towards his intended target Gremory, quietly sizing her up with his eyes. "Very well, Miss Gremory. Let's talk," the Red Rider start. The eyes of the club remained trained on the stranger before them, Aquino letting out a small whistling noise at the transformation that just took place. Era. Quite the flashy entrance you have there. Were you trying to be intimidating or just felt like showing off? The Red Horseman didn't say anything, his eyes instead quickly scanning the room over, along with the 4 teens he currently stood in the presence of. If I'm being perfectly honest, that's really just how the transformation works. I wasn't necessarily trying to be flashy intentionally, but I do admit it is fun to do every now and again. His rather casual tone caused an eyebrow or two to be raised, the group half expecting the man to react in a slightly more hostile sense, and all but demand to move the conversation along. The Red Horseman walked a few steps looking over the room itself, though if you want to talk about being flashy, this room seems to fall into the category. Expensive furniture, eerie-looking candles, and he paused as he looked to the area near Rias's desk with a raised eyebrow. A built-in shower? Didn't realize devils were so hygienic these days. Rias kept her eyes locked on the stranger as he observed the room, paying attention to his movements and energy output. I find taking a shower to be a nice way to unwind and wash away any anxiety after a long day of school and devil business. It's really quite therapeutic. Naruto nodded at the acknowledgement, contemplating actually taking a seat on the nearby couch, though quickly held himself back, partially due to the small silver-haired girl seated firmly nearby. Really wasn't in the mood to start a fight right now, no matter how easy it would have been to win. Rias meanwhile, remaining seated at her desk with her fingers interlocked, causally observing the stranger, all pleasantries aside. I feel it's important we get down to the meat of things. Namely that you should be aware that this area, especially this school, is territory under the House of Gremory. Thus any parties who enter here are to act with a certain degree of etiquette, and behave accordingly, at least those of a supernatural perspective. The Red Horseman had to restrain himself from smacking his head in annoyance at the declaration. So this little high school girl is in charge of this entire city. And here I thought the 3 factions only acted like children, but apparently are also okay with putting actual children in charge. Unbelievable. Naruto, maintaining his composure, lightly crossed his arms over his chest, a slight look of annoyance in his expression. Last time I checked, this land was a part of Japan and wasn't under anyone's ownership. Especially when you take into account that as far as everyone who attends this school is concerned, this school and all territory in the immediate vicinity is land that anyone can use, with it not belonging to any one group of people. He actually broke out into a small smirk for a moment. Plus it's rather arrogant of you to say this land is your territory, since that little demand only works or applies to people aware of your heritage, which are few in number. Hence throwing you so-called weight around like that makes you seem a little conceited, don't you think? The Gremory group seemed a little surprised by the response, with both Kiba and Kaneko only being slightly shocked and raising their respective eyebrows, while Aquino and Rias took it with a little more impact. Typically just mentioning her family's name in casual conversation was enough to get compliance out of most, even managing to deter fallen angels in the past. Yet this one didn't even seem interested. In fact, his very countenance at the remark seemed resemble an adult listening to a child brag about one of their friends to another. Shaking off the shock and apparent lack of respect, the Crimson Princess continued, "Well, regardless of how you view the situation, the fact is that while you are in this land you'll abide by the rules set forth by the House of Gremory, meaning any acts of violence you perform will potentially be seen as an act of aggression against my house, and you will suffer consequences for it." Her tone made all but clear she was confident in her threats carrying significant weight, obviously having gone through the same song and dance routine in the past, with prolonged success. Unfortunately for her, Naruto wasn't the kind of person to take this sort lying down. So on top of being arrogant, she's completely okay with starting a war for the smallest offense. And here I thought I couldn't hate the 3 factions more than I already did. The Red Horseman continued to stare at Rias, now contemplating the proper response to her declaration. Though his hesitation made Rias smirk unaware of his thoughts, seems he finally got the message. Her smirk quickly dropped however, as he spoke. So when you say act of violence, exactly how far does that pertain? Does that mean if I were to casually bump into you, knock you over and cause you to get a scratch or 2 you'd use your fabled powers of destruction on me? The response caught Rias off guard, as well as the rest of those currently seated in the clubroom. Well, it's not quite that serious. The Red Rider, however, quickly cut her off. Or let's say perhaps I maybe smack you in the back of the head for a rude comment, or perhaps even punch you once in the face with no further intention of inciting violence. Would you decide I was worth exterminating right on the spot? Once again Rias couldn't respond quick enough, barely managing out a "I would never" before the stranger managed to cut her off again. You know, I wonder if this is how you act around the school as well. Is that how you handle things here? Someone annoys you or causes you mild discomfort, so you use your powers in one way or another to cause them physical or psychological harm, then justify it by hiding behind your family's name like it's some kind of excuse. While Rias seemingly was swallowing her own tongue trying to respond, the 3 remaining devils were quickly getting themselves on guard, taking note of how with each passing second, The words leaving the stranger's mouth gradually contained greater levels of anger and venom behind them, his disdain for Rias herself becoming rather clear. Another moment or two of being unable to speak, Rias finally found her voice, slamming her palms on her table in a clear showing of authority. Now you listen here. I have never abused my powers in any way towards the people at this school or the city, nor have I ever had an intention of doing so, and you have no right to make such baseless claims about me or besmirch the name of my family. At that point the Red Rider actually burst out into mirthless laughter, the sound of his voice sending icy chills down everyone's spine, Rias's confidence shrinking in an instant. Look at you, once again acting all high and mighty just because you happen to come from some family of devils who think they're hot shit because of a name, and some cheap-ass power they happen to inherit by sheer dumb luck. Well, congratulations Gremory family, you are one in several million other families throughout the millennium that also managed to win the genetic lottery, and gain some kind of power that is the single reason they have any recognition. Whoop da fucking do for you. His cold tone made Rias go quiet as Naruto casually approached her, slamming his own palm on the desk, causing the wood to howl in agony whilst cracks formed around his palm. Rias, however, paid no attention to it, completely frozen as she stared into the blood-red eyes of the man before her. Sweat began to pour from her brow as he looked upon her with a dead gaze. I've seen many things in my life, Miss Gremory, countless families of supposed nobility, like you own, who believed that their blood heritage meant they were destined for great things and used it to justify their actions. Yet as the years passed, their so-called superior blood dried out, their family lines slowly shriveling up, so-called heirlooms being shattered, melted down or simply destroyed, and all records of their so-called legacy vanishing behind the endless sands of time. Their entire existence faded from history and memory, leaving not a single thing of value left behind but dust. He casually turned his back to Rias, walking forward, his form being targeted by the remaining peerage members, each clearly on edge with Akino and Kiba readying their respective weapons, whilst Kaneko readied her fists. Yet he paid them no mind, instead continuing his tirade. Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Adolf Hitler. Every last one of these men believed they were born superior to all those around, that their very blood was sacred, capable of forever changing the world, immortalizing their families in history. Yet eons later, most of the current generation can barely remember, or even spell these figures' names, and very little of their supposed legacy remains, gradually fading from memory. Your so-called house is no different. Once your clan has all but died out, and your Gremory blood spread thin, it'll be another faded name in a history book and memory itself. In fact, in a split second a blood-red knife appeared in the rider's hand before he tossed it directly at Rias, only managing to cut off several strands of her red hair, yet meriting a look of shock from Rias, whilst the Red Rider merely looked on with a dead look in his eyes. Why not just kill you right now? It's not like you'll be remembered for very long, just another heiress, of another noble family. I doubt many will miss you. His action naturally merited a quick reaction, as he quickly found a sword pointed at his throat, a small fist aimed at his stomach, and a tingling sensation of lightning coursing over his back. Whistle. Wow, pretty devoted followers you have here, Mississippi Gremory. His eyes quietly scanned over the three, Kiba holding a focused yet calm expression, his sword locked firmly in his hands, ready to slice. Kaneko still held a neutral expression, but it was obvious she was on edge and ready to attack the second he made a move. Really, the only one not acting totally serious was Akino, who despite the situation still held a smile on her face. Granted, it was a rather narrow, creepy kind of smile you'd expect to see on a sociopath, but still, I must say I have some degree of respect. They certainly seem steadfast and protective of you. Most people wouldn't just blindly attack someone they know so little about, running the risk of facing a much stronger enemy and possible injury. I'm actually curious what exactly you did to merit such dedication. Rias, still slightly shook up, managed to shake herself out of her stupor. I can assure you that my peerage member's loyalty is the result of the bond we share. I see every individual I take in as both a friend and member of my family, who I would be just as quick to defend as they are to defend me. A mindset that is shared by every member of the House of Gremory. The horseman merely raised an eyebrow at the declaration, making sure to remain as still as stone. So they have some degree of loyalty amongst themselves. A bit admirable, I must admit, but somehow I doubt it's that clear-cut. As he looked at the three little bearing at his throat, I'm guessing that you all must have had rather tragic pasts to be so willing to protect this girl. I highly doubt you'd be so willing to act for a friend unless you truly valued them. Kiba's sword moved ever so closer to the rider's neck. It's really none of your business, but we all owe our lives to Rias Bucho. We owe everything to her. Kaneko nodded. No one attacks Bucho. Akino let out another of her sinister giggles at the proclamation. Era. I think a bit of punishment is in order for our rather rude guest. He's already attacked and insulted Bucho. Perhaps a little shock treatment will make him more compliant. Her hand unleashed another jolt of lightning for emphasis. Rias actually seemed to consider the option, as the man had directly insulted her and her family as well as making an obvious attempt at her life. I doubt brother or anyone would really complain if I took action against this man. No, then I'd just be enforcing exactly what he accused me of, and I'm not some serial murderer. However, I feel incapacitation might be the best option after all. Her eyes quickly met with those of Naruto, sending another chill down her spine and sweat to form once again. Even though he has a sword to his throat and attackers on all sides, he's completely calm. As if he could just wave his hand and get out of this situation anytime he wanted. Her thoughts were slightly jumbled as she debated her actions. A sigh quietly broke her from her thoughts as she looked once again upon the Red Horseman. Looking of all things bored, attempting to stay in control, Rias shook any troubling thoughts from her mind. You know, you're surprisingly calm for someone in such a precarious situation. Naruto merely let out a breath in response. If only you knew, as he continued to stand, forgive me, but I see no real reason to worry or care about my current predicament. His response made Rias feel truly on edge, actually making her hesitant to speak, actually sending a nod to her peerage members ready themselves. And why? May I ask, do you feel so calm? Because your ability to hold me is entirely dependent on the loyalty of your followers and their willingness to protect you as a result of that allegiance. With those words he moved his hand ever so slightly, placing his middle finger and thumb together, his eyes beginning to glow red as he spoke. And loyalty, Miss Gremory, like any bond, no matter how strong, can be broken. A loud snapping noise resounded throughout the entire clubroom, effectively cutting off all other sounds in the room, as if a gun had just been fired. Rias managing to catch sight of a quick shift in power. What did he? Rias, however, quickly halted her thoughts as a quick sensation of pain was felt across her cheek, warm liquids slowly flowing down. A dripping sound was heard, as Rias looked upon her hand, to which small drops of blood could be seen, which she quickly traced to her cheek. A lone cut now present upon her once flawless skin. Her eyes widened as she looked upon the attacker Kiba, looking upon her with red glowing eyes, hatred pulsing from his gaze, his sword dripping with Rias' own blood. The Crimson Princess too shocked to even respond to the action itself. She barely had any time to think, as a heavy force slammed into her stomach, sending her flying violently into the wall behind her desk, blood now dripping from her mouth. Looking up, her eyes widened in horror and shock at the sight of Kaneko with her tiny outstretched fist, her own eyes also red with hatred. She let out a small croak at the sight. Koneko wa. A loud scream soon echoed throughout the air as tears welled up from Rias' eyes, electricity pulsing throughout her body. Catching sight of her best friend Akino, using her own lightning powers against her, she stayed suspended to the wall for a moment, before the weight of her body and lack of muscle control caused her to fall forward. Her limp body crashed hard against the wooden desk, sending her books and papers falling to the floor, her own face impacting against the desk, smearing blood across it, mixing in with her sweat and tears. The rest of her body was in no better shape, burned and bloodily, with numerous cuts and bruises from her most trusted friends. Looking up at the intruder, snacking on one of the cookies Kaneko had since abandoned, she made an attempt to raise herself, only to feel a hand wrap around her wrist, her eyes looking up to spot Akino looking down upon her, red glowing eyes bearing down upon her with a look of pure rage. The very sight brought tears to her eyes. Akino, it's me, Rias. You can't tell me you forgot? Her only response was another cold look and another heavy surge of electric energy racing through her body. A howl of immense pain ripped through the clubhouse, Rias' body hitting the desk again with greater force, her body being quickly held in place by Kaneko. Naruto casually picked up another cookie, taking a bite out of it, seemingly without a single care. The little cat girl certainly has fine taste in snacks. Of course I prefer chocolate chip cookies personally. His attention turning over to the teacup seated next to the cookies. Can't say I'm much for the tea. Never really liked it for some reason. What did you do to them? The Red Horseman halted his attempt to take another bite of the snack in his hand, his gaze shifting over to Rias, trying desperately to raise her head to face her enemy. Naruto only let out a casual in response, barely acknowledging her question. She's able to raise her head up despite her injuries. I'll give her a point for tenacity. Rias' normal composure quickly broke at the sight of the man ignoring her, quickly clenching her hand into a fist and slamming it down in a rage at him. I said answer me, damn it. What did you do to my friends? Quietly he took another bite from the cookie, before meeting Rias with a harsh gaze. Without even saying a word he snapped his fingers again, Kaneko harshly slamming Rias down onto the hardwood desk in response, cracking it further and meriting another cry from the downed princess. You're in no position to make demands, you self-entitled little brat. He quietly got up off the couch, another cookie still in hand as he made his way to the downed girl, watching her weakly struggle against her friend's grip, blood and tears leaking from her body, trying desperately to look intimidating. Naruto merely sneered at her. Don't you look downright pathetic right now? Seems for all your grandstanding, without your friends you're little more than an overdeveloped red-haired weakling. Of course it's just like I said. As he continued to speak he quietly fiddled with the cookie in between his fingers. You can give yourself as many fancy titles as you want. Brag about your family's bloodline until your face turns blue. Claim to have some kind of end-all-be-all power. Yet in the end, all that bravado and hot air only works when you have people who believe in all the family superiority bullshit and are willing to back you up when the need arises. And why do people stand by you? Loyalty, and therein lies the rub. His eyes darted to the various peerage members currently standing at his beck and call, sending a nod to Kaneko to let Rias raise her head enough to see. To put it simply, that kind of commitment to someone, no matter how strong or deep the bond shared may be, can be broken through one simple thing: hatred. Every person has something or someone they truly despise, and that revulsion spreads like venom in an open wound, corrupting every thought, every impulse in that person's mind, till violence, bloodshed and rage are all that they see. All I did was bring that inner violence to the surface and direct it towards you. He actually let loose a rather mirthless chuckle as he scanned over the three individuals, though I must say, it usually isn't as easy as it was with these three. Then again, manipulating a person's inner darkness is child's play when you have such incentives like pointing first to Kiba, feelings of treachery and rage towards those you trusted, only to learn they only saw you and your friends as expendable tools and watch helplessly as those you cared for died senselessly before your eyes. He shifted to Kaneko, or feeling betrayed by your own sister, whose only selfish actions and desires lead you to face a life of persecution and despair, so much so that you give up your own name in a vain attempt to lessen the pain. Finally his gaze fell upon Akino, or even feeling nothing but bitter rage towards your father, blaming him for the death of your mother, and abhorring him so much that you hide your own heritage in shame, forced to live every day keeping that secret from all. He slowly made his way towards the captive Rias holding a cookie in between his fingers, fiddling with it as he moved. Bring all that hatred to the surface and you become a general with no army, and any title or rank you once held equates to jack and shit. Just another nameless individual who, with a quick application of pressure, the cookie was reduced to dust, breaks just like the rest. He quietly dusted his hands off, looking upon the girl before him, rolling his eyes as he watched her continue to struggle somewhat, quietly turning his back to her, not the least bit bothered by the cold glare she was attempting to give him. You can glare at me until your eyes burn out. It won't change your situation. Then again, if you're so adamant about acting tough in spite of everything. With another snap, Rias felt a weight remove itself from her back, managing to raise her body up, only to regret that decision. Her three friends and allies were each facing each other. Kaneko's fists were raised, Kiba's sword beginning to glimmer as he readied his sacred gear. Akino's palms began to glow and pulse with electric energy. Her gaze quickly shifted to Naruto, once again looking at her with a dead, almost empty gaze. I could make them turn on each other, until one is left standing. He casually raised his hand, much like an executioner's axe. He prepared to unleash the trio on each other as he looked at Rias with soulless eyes. So tell me, Ms. Gremory, do you still feel in control? Rias didn't have a chance to say anything, though it wasn't because Naruto moved too fast for her to react or anything, rather because someone managed to beat her to the punch. Bucho. Rias's tear-stained eyes widened in surprise and a joy at the sight of the doors of her club room bursting open, revealing a brown-haired teen, barreling into the room with a determined look in his light brown eyes. Rias Bucho? Another voice echoed in the room, as the boy who had just appeared was followed swiftly by a short girl with long blonde hair, green eyes and overall innocent look to her. The Red Rider merely felt the urge to groan at the pair's arrival. Wonderful, there's more of them. As if this already tedious task wasn't enough of a pain in my ass, now I have to deal with these two. Issei, Asia. Rias's previously held worry was replaced slightly with relief at the sight of her two remaining servants/friends. The pair meanwhile looked upon the situation with a mixture of confusion and horror at the current state of both Rias and the makeshift Mexican standoff their friends were currently in. Issei in particular seemed especially surprised. Kiba, Kankyo-chan, Akino-senpai. What's with you guys? The three were silent, none so much as twitching in spite of the boy's entrance, or his calls. Seeing no reaction or words from the three, the teen moved his attention to the other figure in the room, namely the blonde-haired teen in the red duster jacket and big-ass sword on his back, currently with his hand held up in a snapping position. Issei, while an idiot who spent more time reading and watching porn than pretty much anything else, was not so stupid that he couldn't put two and two together. With a glare and flick of the wrist, Issei's arm was encased in bright green light and a red and gold gauntlet formed around his arms, the bright green jewel in the middle of the hand crying out, "Boost!" The sight merited a slight eye raise from the Red Horseman. Looking at the gauntlet with slight interest, seems the Gremory girl managed to get her hands on a Longinus user. And wouldn't you know it, it's Drag, the Red Dragon Emperor, also known as Boosted Gear. First the White Dragon Emperor, then Ophis, the Gremory heiress, and now the Red Dragon Emperor. I swear, this city is like a clusterfuck of supernatural entities. His continued thoughts were halted by the teen's own heated gaze towards him. You're the one who hurt Bucho, didn't you? As he spoke, his gauntlet-encased fist increased in grip, the armor again screaming boost. The Red Horseman again acted without any real care at the boy's attempts to scare him, actually shoving his hands into his pockets as a clear sign of indifference. Not really, as you can see by the look of things, her three comrades were the ones that battered and bruised her. The only thing I'm guilty of hurting in this room is her desk and pride. His response received another loud cry of boost from the teen's weapon, followed by punch to the face or attempted punch, as the horseman easily avoided the strike, casually moving his neck out of the way, using on the bare minimum of movement to prevent contact, now getting an up-close look at the boy who was glaring at him angrily. Don't you dare lie to me. Akino-senpai and the others would never hurt Rias Bucho. I know you did it, and I'll make you pay for it. His anger and killing intent quickly increased with ever-passing second, his gauntlet letting off another boost cry. Yet again the Red Horseman didn't even flinch at the declaration, only sighing again, like looking through a mirror. Okay, a cracked mirror with a lot of dirt all over it, but still. I can't believe there was a point in my life where I was this reckless. The kid's way too confident for his own good. Looking again at the teen, the horseman's eyes shined red again, attempting to influence him like the others. Yet strangely enough nothing happened, as Issei wound his gauntlet-clad hand back to deliver another blow. Well, that's interesting. The boy wound himself up for another attack, ignoring the cries of the slightly recovered Rias, attempting to get him to retreat. His fist, however, never even got the chance to launch, as a crushing force latched itself onto his face, brutally slamming the teen onto his back and into the hardwood floor, caving it in slightly. He barely managed to open his eyes to look up, before another force quickly pressed down onto his sacred gear, preventing him from moving it despite the gear continuing to power him up. At the same time, another crushing force landed directly into his sternum. A loud cracking sound echoed through the room, with a brief rasp of a scream escaping the boy's mouth, who found his attacker's left foot placed firmly on his chest. All the while his attacker continued to look upon the boy with slight interest. Well, this certainly is rare. The kid defiantly has hatred inside of him, and it's likely under normal circumstances he'd been like any other. However, in this kid's case the horseman shifted over to the Gremory air, being tended to by the blonde girl, seemingly healing her with her own sacred gear, twilight healing. Both parties seemed rather fragile at the moment, completely beside themselves with fear and panic for the boy he currently had under his literal heel. Seems the boy's love for the Gremory girl is so strong, it's actually drowning out any hatred he has inside of him. Though it also seems like that's mainly due to the sheer bout of perversity running through this kid's head. I honestly don't know whether to be impressed by that or downright embarrassed that such a person exists. Then again, now's not really the time for that. The horseman continued to look at the teen, a bit of pity crossing his eyes as he continued to struggle with what little might he could muster up to free himself from the horseman's grip, still willing to fight on to protect his friends despite everything. Kid's got guts, pity that alone doesn't win you much in the end. You're wasting your time, the rider spoke calmly, halting his enemy's struggles for a moment to listen in. Even if that boosted gear of yours keeps doubling your strength from now till the next decade, you still won't be able to move. His only response was another grunt of exertion from the teen as he continued to struggle. You can say that all you want, pal. I don't give a damn what you say. You hurt Rias, you made her friends attack her and made her cry. I don't care how strong you think you are, I'll still kick you ass. Is that so? You really think you can still win in spite of your situation? Issei didn't respond to the question, causing the horseman to let out a tired sigh at his stubbornness. I don't know if becoming a devil made this kid so stubborn or if he was just born this way. But it seems he just isn't getting the message of who's in charge here. Oh well. With a quick flick of the wrist, a red desert eagle quickly appeared in the rider's hands, before he promptly pointed the barrel directly in front of Issei's mouth. The action merited looks of shock, horror and panic from all those present in the room not currently under mind control. None more so that Issei, whose confidence seemed to drop rather quickly at the sudden change. Well, seems you and your king share some things in common. You both like to talk big and act tough, until you find yourself in a less favorable situation, like having a gun shoved in your face, that you suddenly lose all that bravado. He paused for a minute as he cocked the gun, merited another panicked look from the teen. Of course, it probably doesn't help that the bullet in this little gun has the same amount of destructive force as a hydrogen bomb, so that probably makes being even remotely confident kind of difficult. Certainly enough, that last term was enough to net a collective horrified look from the last three people in the room that was able to think straight. Why, you're be bluffing. You'd whiling and nuke the entire sea city. Rias tried to call out with some bravado, but was contrasted with her tear-stained face. Asia meanwhile simply looking at the rider in pure horror, barely containing the tears running down her face. The rider said nothing, simply staring down the sight of his gun, Issei's own face holding unrivaled terror, seemingly now realizing just now that death was quite literally centimeters away from him. Old man dragon. Can't you do something? Give me more power. What do you need for it? My arm, my leg. Fuck, I'll give you my whole body. Just give me something to work with and hurry. The red dragon said nothing at first, making Issei panic even more. Come on already. If we don't do something, everyone and everything in the city will be destroyed. Take my body already and let me take this guy down. I cannot. Issei paused, his eyes going almost blank at the statement. You're joking, right? You're messing with me. Come on, you helped me take down Riser even though he was out of my league, so this guy shouldn't be any different, right? I'm afraid it's not that simple, boy. While it's true I've helped you overcome foes in the past, no sacrifice either of us makes would be enough to conquer the foes standing before you. Issei found his confidence dropping further and further. You can't be serious. You're supposed to be some super badass dragon, one that's supposed to be able to slay gods and devils alike. The dragon again paused before he spoke, actually letting out a tired sigh. There is something you need to learn, and learn fast, boy. In this world of supernatural creatures, any being, no matter how strong, will always answer to another whose powers far eclipse their own. And unfortunately, this is one of those times. Issei quickly felt the dragon's voice grow silent, his connection to the creature growing dim. So that's it. After everything that's happened, everything I've been through, I'm just gonna die again, along with everyone else? The pervert's eyes quietly shifted to Rias and Asia looking upon him with tear-stained eyes, both barely able to contain themselves. The sight of this brought renewed strength to the teen's eyes, his gauntlet beginning to shine anew with bright green light. his attacker looking upon the sight with a small amount of interest. Yep, just like how I used to be, right down to the last desperate attack. If only he knew the truth. Issei meanwhile found himself flashing back to the first time he experienced this same sensation, his first raiding game. In that instance, one riser Phoenix, high-ranking devil, heir to the Phoenix clan and all-around douchebag had soundly trounced him. Despite Rias and her group coming far, and challenging his peerage, even going so far as to nearly win the match. In the end, Issei was the last piece standing, and reduced to a punching bag before Rias's eyes. She ultimately forfeited, unable to stand watching him suffer and further, and had it not been for Issei's stubborn interference, his king likely would have been lost to him forever, and even after everything I've been through. I'm still failing to protect Bucho. I vowed to make sure she never cried like that again, and I'd make anyone who caused her such pain to pay no matter the sacrifice. So you know what, screw you old man dragon. I don't care who this guy is, he hurt Bucho and he's gonna pay no matter who he is, and I'll do it, with or without your help. Issei tightened the grip of his gauntlet arm, which continued to double his power with each 10-second interval. Even if it's not enough to kill him, the blast should be able to at least push him back. Might end up doing some damage to Clubroom, but it'll be worth it. Managing to shift his wrist enough to where his palm was now directly facing Naruto, the light quickly shifted from green to red, before his palm opened wide, the red light forming a small sphere of energy within it. Rias and Asia both took note of the attack coming, the red-haired princess looking to the blonde, Asia, "Get behind me quick." The stunned girl barely said anything, only nodding to herself as instructed, a red magical barrier quickly forming around them. All the while the horsemen in the room simply watched the events play out without much care, knowing fully how things would play out. I'm actually half tempted just to end things now and call it a day. Doesn't feel right to keep jerking them around like this. Maybe I'm falling back on some old habits and still get a kick out of screwing with people, who really knows. His attention shifted to Issei, whose attack was ready to fire. Take this bastard, dragon shot. The gauntlet let out a powerful scream of explosion and released the small orb into a massive stream of red energy that burst forward like a jet going supersonic, barreling towards the Red Rider with speeds that normally would have been too fast to follow, and by all accounts would have shifted the tides of the fight. Sadly, this was not to be. So, this was your last move, was it? The eyes of all the devils in the room could not get much wider than they were at present, and their morale could not drop much lower. In fact, they were having a hard time simply grasping the fine concept of what they were witnessing before them. Standing there, in the same position as before, the Red Horseman, Naruto stood with his left hand outstretched, and right within his palm was Issei's dragon shot attack. The tiny sphere of energy shaking like an electron, trying desperately to move about, yet seemingly trapped in place with no clear explanation. The only thought running through the minds of the devils present was he caught the dragon shot, with his bare hand? All the while the warrior currently holding the energy as if it were a fly, simply stood there looking at the orb and Issei's smoking gauntlet. Were you really so arrogant to think you could kill me with this wet firecracker of an attack? His gripe quickly tightened around the orb, the darkness of his hand swallowing all the light. A crunch was heard as small bits of red dust fell between his fingers. It was in that single moment that he saw any glimmer of hope the group once held completely fade away, now lost in the sea of hopelessness that was their current situation. The sight brought a tired sigh from the ancient warrior, acting almost relieved at the matter seemingly being resolved. Okay, I think I've gotten my point across and done enough damage for one day. With a casual flick of the wrist, the gun in his hand quietly dissipated into a small red mist, whilst the rider removed his foot from the teen's hand and body before casually moved away from the teen. He quickly turned his attention to the three remaining devils, still under his iron grip. With a brief flicker of the eyes, the rage-filled gaze disappeared from the three, before they each collapsed unconscious where they once stood. Hopefully this should cause enough of a distraction to get Ophis off of my back for a while. If these devils are as proud as they claim to be, then they'll probably start sending their agents after me the second they get the chance. The horseman quietly made his way towards the doors to leave the club building, walking past the three still conscious individuals left in the room, both girls currently clutching onto the lone male left standing into the room for dear life, almost ignoring his own presence though not completely. Why? His eyebrow quirked at the voice, turning his head slightly to see Issei looking at him with a bitter gaze, his boosted gear still glowing, though with far less light than before. Ria similarly, looking at her attacker with a cold gaze, despite all that had happened. What the hell did we ever do to you? We've never even seen you before, so why attack us? What exactly were you hoping to accomplish? Naruto only shook his head. You devils, acting completely ignorant to everything around you, to the harm you cause. Maybe not you specifically, but your entire race. No, the three factions in general have done more than enough throughout the centuries to give me plenty of reasons to act. You just unfortunately were the ones I decided to focus on. As he spoke, his body slowly began to turn into the same red energy as before, gradually flowing out the door like wind, yet his face still remained long enough to issue his last few words. The only reason I'm letting you live right now is because, despite appearances, I don't take any kind of pleasure in needlessly slaughtering people, even supernatural beings like yourself. But don't think that means I'm just gonna leave enough alone? The group watched as what remained of the figure's head changed into the red energy, slowly making its way towards the door. I suggest you prepare yourselves. War has come to your city and it's here for the long haul. And with those words the last of the red energy left through the door, slamming it shut, leaving the three stunned teens to muse over what they just saw. Red Rider and Red Rider start. This is quite the unsettling turn of events. Michael, the seraph and current god, muttered to himself as he looked upon the world, having bared witness to the assault upon Gremory by the mysterious attacker. Whilst it was not uncommon for there to be attacks against the Gremory house, especially with the recent fallen angel assault, the sheer brazen disregard for the consequences of such actions was staggering. Michael could tell the stranger would have no qualms killing Rias or her peerage members, either of which would have likely been the spark to call forth another war, something all three factions needed to avoid. I take it this stranger is why you called me, brother dear? Michael frowned, though ever so slightly as he bared upon the bright visage of his sister, second in command of heaven and the White City's strongest woman, Gabriel. With 12 golden wings shining with light nearly equal to his own, she was the sight that any person, man or woman would be blinded to see. Ordinarily he would never bother her with any matters, but this was a dire situation and thus demanded immediate action. Gabriel herself peered upon earth, viewing the images that Michael had seen, quite a bold individual. Is he with the fallen angels perhaps or another rival faction? It's currently unknown who this being is, though I have my doubts he's with the fallen angels or any one of the three factions. His clear act of violence towards the Gremory heir shows a complete lack of regard for our neutrality. Thus I can only assume he is independent or acting as an agent for another faction. Though, regardless, we cannot simply ignore his actions. Had he taken his attack against Miss Gremory any further and killed one of her servants, it's likely the Gremory family and potentially all of the underworld would see the action as a declaration of war, and with no party to positively connect the assassin to, suspicion and paranoia would ultimately result in bloodshed, which we cannot afford in these times. The strongest female angel nodded as she extended her 12 wings, whilst flexing her fingers. I'm guessing you want me to confront this individual and tell him to stop. If it can be resolved peacefully, that would be the best option. Though I doubt it is likely to be that simple. If necessary, use extreme force to halt him, or even kill him if the need arises. You're really that concerned about this? I would never ask you or any individual to do so otherwise. Still, I advise you to use caution. This entity is strong and has a very unusual energy I can't pinpoint. Best to be on your guard. Gabriel let loose a childish smirk. Come on, Michael. I think I can handle one random thug. Shouldn't be any trouble at all. Scene change. Nighttime. The Red Horseman silently mused to himself, seated upon the rooftop of the Academy building, having retaken his hawk form after his encounter with the Gremory group. While he'd effectively completed at least part of his mission, a little voice in his head told him to remain, if only for a little longer, to observe the results of what had transpired. Truth be told, it was much easier than originally perceived, having taken full advantage of his hawk-like vision, able to spy on the Gremory group again, but from a considerable distance, while masking his aura to avoid further detection. Being spotted prior was a light blunder on his part, but given he had nothing to fear from the small group, he'd let his guard down somewhat, a mistake he'd be sure to avoid in the future. During his second recon mission, he managed to gather a bit more useful information about the Gremory group, specifically the late arrivals. The boy, who he'd thoroughly trounced, was Issei, a 17-year-old pervert who'd recently become a devil thanks to some fallen angels and his poor luck at being selected to be the wielder of the Red Dragon Emperor. In terms of strength, while he had the potential to be stronger than the entire group combined, his lack of any natural talent, strength, wisdom, pretty much anything of value, and his insane level of perversity, made him little more than a slight annoyance. Granted, he was also aware of the boy's battle with Riser Phoenix, a rather powerful devil from an esteemed family, in order to prevent Rias from an arranged marriage. Regardless, his threat level was still considerably low, and not much to brag about. The other girl, however, was quite a different story. Mainly because he watched her quickly heal the injuries on both Rias and Issei he'd inflicted in one way or another, using a pair of rings that emitted a strong green light, the sight of which made him cringe slightly, more so due to the aura both they and the girl emitted. Asia Argento, former nun and holy woman, expelled from the church after healing a devil and later reborn as a devil after being killed by fallen angels, and arguably the closest thing to a saint he'd seen in years. Seriously, the girl was more pure, innocent and kind than most angels he'd seen. It was actually a bit disgusting just how nice she was, which made him rather glad he didn't have to attack her. He honestly didn't know if he'd have the stomach for it. Still, that sacred gear she had is unusual and interesting as well. A gear that can heal any injury, even from someone evil or good, regardless of species, at least most species anyway. Best keep my eyes open when I'm around her, she might be a problem if I'm not careful. His eyes quietly looked around at the empty schoolyard, the entire occult research club having left the school some time ago to lick their wounds and prepare themselves for their next run-in with him. It was honestly amusing to watch Rias Gremory order her peerage members to be on guard and be ready for some intense training in the future. If only she knew the truth. Girl hasn't a clue how big the world really is or how small she is. Actually debating whether I should just tell her who I am just to see her reaction. Nah, it's more interesting when they figure it out themselves. Though I do wonder how long that'll take. Quietly, he stretched his wings out, his body quickly reforming into red energy, gradually growing in height. Slowly his body began to change shape, quickly resuming his human form, the horseman proceeding to crack his neck and loosen out his joints. Almost forgot how stiff turning into a bird can be, or maybe just because I haven't been doing a lot of shape shifting lately. He paused for a minute, closing his eyes as he let out another sigh. Or perhaps it's the wings. Having a pair of limbs you don't normally have can be a problem. What do you think, Ms. Angel? Slowly opening his eyes as he turned his head around. Or should I say, Ms. Gabriel? His eyes blinked as they were assaulted by a bright white, almost golden, light, slowly gazing upon a rather beautiful visage of a young woman with short curly blonde hair, eyes that were as blue as the wide open skies, and a fairly impressive-looking figure. Though she was currently clad in some bulky angel robes, so it was hard to see. Really the most impressive feature was the 12 wings upon her back, each emitting a light nearly as bright as the sun, a symbol of her strength and power. Were he a normal human, he'd either be pinching himself out of shock, crying at the sight of a freaking angel before his eyes, or drooling over the fact there was an insanely hot woman literally right in front of him. Of course he had more than enough self-control and little care at the time to do anything. Instead, he looked upon the angel with a somewhat mixed reaction. Have to say this isn't quite the meeting I was expected. Truth be told, I was waiting to see how long it would take for that idiot Surzex to rip the ground open just to try and take a crack at me. Calmly, he flexed his hands out, walking a little closer towards the angel. As he reached the edge of the roof, yet instead I'm greeted by heaven's second in command. Tell me, is knocking an overconfident little heiress off her high horse really all it takes to get the White City to send one of their best, or do you just have nothing better to do? The angel both cringed and raised an eyebrow at the horseman's tone and complete lack of respect. That is, generally people show respect, fear or some combination of the two when in the visage of her or her brother. That wasn't something she thought about out of pride, more just an established trend she'd grown accustomed to. The same could also be said for his complete disregard towards Rias and his actions. Still, she wasn't so petty she'd let a few harsh words break her composure, while Michael was right about his complete lack of tact. But I need to remain professional, don't want to cause a fight if I don't have to. She tried her best to look as though she were commanding a sense of authority from the being, as she looked upon him, trying to remain neutral as she did. Normally we try to avoid getting too involved in each other's affairs. However, we've done what we can to maintain the truce we've held up to this point, and will do anything to keep it from being broken. The Red Rider let out a bitter chuckle at her comment. Truce? You call your 3 assorted groups gathering weapons, getting into skirmishes on a daily basis, and being just a hair trigger away from annihilating each other, and everything around you a truce? He chuckled again. Tell me, what exactly do you consider peace? Total genocide of the other 2 factions? Once again, the angel cringed at the venom dripping from his tone of voice, but did her best to keep her composure, though finding it increasingly difficult. I feel nothing but pure malice coming from this being, as if he were made purely of rage and fury. Shaking her thoughts clear, she adopted a more confident face. Whatever issue you may have with either heaven, the devils or the fallen angels, you must know that you cannot simply attack whomever you like and not expect consequence. Your actions today could have easily sparked a war that could have very well destroyed everything around us. Oh, you mean like the last great war? Where you immature brats nearly destroyed everything because of your own petty disagreements. His bold declaration caused Gabriel's words to become caught in her thoughts, her brain suddenly coming to a halt, the sight of which merited a small smirk from the Red Horseman, having sucked a lot of the angel's bravado away from her with his declaration. Oh, you weren't expecting that, were you? Well, I'm not exactly sure what else I can say, considering I saw it all take place, and you must certainly realize my apprehension towards you 3, considering that your little conflict nearly destroyed this entire world and existence along with it. That's not even counting the numerous lives you sacrificed, including the original Satans and God himself. Gabriel quickly felt a cold sweat drip down her brow at the last words spoken by the intruder. How does he know that? God's death in the last great war is a well-kept secret. Only those of the highest ranking, including Azazel and the 4 great Satans, are aware of that. For him to know that, he'd either have to be a spy or old enough to have actually taken part in the war himself? Her eyes quickly narrowed at the thought, adopting a much more serious demeanor. Strange though, I don't remember ever seeing him during the war. True, it was a chaotic time, but an individual as powerful as this one or as unusual would have certainly been recorded, at least to some extent. Then again, what he's saying makes it hard to doubt his claims. The Archangel tensed her hands, cautious as she ready to speak, knowing from the viewing that the individual had a hair-trigger temper wouldn't hesitate to get violent. You say you were present during the war itself. I don't remember seeing you there. And even if what you say is true, you should be more than well aware that we in heaven, along with the current Satans, have done our best to avoid conflicts like that from occurring again. Naruto, however, didn't seem to share her sentiment, his eyes hardening at the words. Really? Because from where I'm standing, all I've seen is your so-called peace walking on a tightrope from turning into all-out war. You've been at each other's throats since the war ended and haven't let up for a moment. Hell, I know that a couple of annoying crows are ready to stir up trouble, and yet you've done nothing to even try to prevent war from breaking out. So really, are you just too lazy to step in, or do you actually want to start another war? Gabriel's demeanor and face were becoming progressively strained at the verbal lashing she was receiving from the horseman. True enough, some of his comments, especially those alluding to the fallen angels had a grain of accuracy to them. But the claims that she or the other factions actually wanted to start up another war was a rather harsh and vile accusation to say the least, and not one she'd take lying down. Part of her was becoming increasingly tempted to actually lash out at the individual for his comments, which thankfully she was able to restrain for the moment. But it was becoming increasingly difficult with each verbal barb he unleashed. I'm starting to see why Michael believed violence might be necessary here. Not only is this guy rude, but he's abrasive and confrontational, almost like he wants to start a fight with me. And I'm getting very tempted to do so. The horseman merely stared at the angel as she mused over her thoughts, maintaining a neutral standing, yet still pushing his rather harsh tones towards her. Well, at least she isn't trying to throw her weight or title around like the Gremory girl, and my verbal barbs haven't caused her to lash out in anger. So at the very least she's a more patient and thick-skinned individual. Even so, looking closely at the angel who had yet to make a move, the horseman quirked his eyes slight at her. You know, I find myself curious. What exactly are you hoping to take from this exchange exactly? If you're expecting to intimidate or restrain me, you might as well go back to heaven and tell Michael to go ram it, 'cause that's never going to happen. Then just for the sake of poking the preverbal bear, the horseman looked up to the skies. Of course, if the apparent archangel is so much of a coward that he needs to send his little sister to do his dirty work for him, well, I guess he's just an overstuffed chicken who's too much of a little bitch to get his ass in gear and do something productive with all that power he has. He quickly turned his head slightly at that last crack, Gabriel looking a bit hostile at his comment, having formed a dagger of light and thrown it directly at him. Well, seems I managed to touch a nerve with that last crack. Taking note of her quick response, the horseman seemed to gain a bit of interest. Of course, it seems you would much rather fight me. Well, I'd say you're perfectly welcome to take a crack at me if you want. Gabriel practically didn't need any coaxing from the red warrior, a double-bladed light spear forming in her hands, which she spun in multiple directions with expert precision before pointing the deadly blade towards her adversary. The 12-winged angel sneered slightly at her opponent, eager for a fight. I will not allow you to speak ill of my brother or heaven. We have done our best to ensure what peace we can in this world and sacrificed a great deal, despite having lost God so recently, and I won't allow you to mock us for it. Naruto, however, snorted at her words. Say whatever you want, the truth of the matter is you've done the bare minimum in regards to fixing the problems with the three factions. It's clear you and the other leaders are tired of fighting, yet you never actively sought out peace until recently, and in that time countless lives, human angel, fallen angel and devil, as well as many other species have been needlessly sacrificed just cause you couldn't get your collective thumbs out of your asses until things became too hairy for you to ignore. He then scoffed at her attempts to glare at him, uncrossing his arms and resting them at his sides. All you're doing at this point is making up excuses, and until you take affirmative action to achieve some kind of peace, you're nothing but a bunch of immature and ineffective rulers who've allowed others to needlessly suffer for your indecisiveness. He watched as Gabriel's hold on her spear tightened with each verbal barb. And while we're talking about ineffectiveness, tell me, was all that spear spinning and flare necessary, or do you really feel the need to try and impress me with your little routine? His critique caught the angel significantly off guard, actually unable to respond to the somewhat surprising statement and tone of the opponent, who seemed to be speaking to her, as if he were an instructor talking with a student in a manner that says you suck and here's the reasons why. As the horseman looked upon the angel, his hands would move ever so slightly, somewhat pointing towards the angel's stance and position. Did it ever occur to you that in the few seconds you spend spinning your weapon around like a band major, you could have used the element of surprise to attack me from one angle or another? Adopting a more instructor-like stance, his left hand cupping his chin while his free hand waved slightly. In fact, if I were to precisely calculate it, you had about 20, 30, maybe 50 opportunities to attack me in the 3 to 4 second time frame in which you decided to show off. His tone became more critical as he spoke, yet instead of attempting to exploit these options that any novice soldier new to the battlefield would have taken advantage of, you decided to simply sit there and wait, just like how you angels and the other factions have handled everything else up to this point. If Naruto could have heard it, Gabriel's fuse had effectively been lit by that last crack and she prepared to attack, or rather that's what she wanted to do, only to find herself unable to move an inch, her eyes widening considerably as she struggled in vain to move. And lo and behold, your failure to take decisive action has led to your effect downfall. The horseman slowly rose into the air, floating without wings or anything else, whilst looking at Gabriel like a captured butterfly, her light spear quickly dissipating due to it having been rendered useless. The angel herself looking both puzzled and a bit furious. What exactly did you do to me? The horseman merely scoffed as he brought his right hand close to his face, Gabriel quickly finding her arms moving in response against her will, her eyes quickly figuring out what had happened while Naruto merely looked on. I took quick and decisive action. As he spoke, a massive array of crimson wires, all attached to his fingers, quickly became visible to the angel, all arranged in a massive spider web, with her being the proverbial fly caught in his web. The wires themselves were wrapped tightly around her body, her waist, the joints of her upper and lower limbs, around her neck and around her torso. The horseman casually pulled on the wires somewhat, causing Gabriel to raise her arms up almost in surrender, as if to mock her situation more. You'd best try not to struggle. These wires are made from my energy, and the only reason you haven't been cut to pieces is because I'm allowing it. A single thought would be all it would take to tear you apart. His comment merited a look of worry in the angel's eyes, but he ignored that, quickly becoming more interested in the storm clouds forming above them. With lightning beginning to strike, looks like Big Brother just entered protective mode. The horseman, however, still wasn't worried, knowing the lightning was only for show. Michael was too law-abiding to leave his position in heaven unless drastic action was taken. Still, he turned to the captured angel, who was maintaining a calm exterior, but he could see she was at least a little afraid, likely not accustomed to being caught so easily, though you shouldn't be too afraid. Despite how I'm acting, I'm not interested in starting a fight with heaven or your brother. Really, this is more of making a point, namely that I'm not someone your usual intimidation tactics will work on, nor will attempting to strong-arm me. The captured angel looked perplexed at his comment, though didn't feel the need to press the issue, since at the moment any decision she would make would have negative consequences, namely for everybody but her opponent. Instead, she opted to simply ask the question on hers and everyone else's minds. If that's the case, what exactly do you want here? You show up out of nowhere and attack a fairly valued member of one of the three factions. Didn't you expect some form of retaliation? With another pull of the wires he lowered Gabriel's arms, but still maintained control over her. In order, what I'm doing here is none of your business. Nor is it heaven's or anyone else's for that matter, and you're not in a position to really push that issue. As for the second, even if that's true, I sincerely doubt I'm the first person to attack that girl, and I likely won't be the last. So that hardly seems like a sufficient recourse for this. Gabriel, however, didn't seem too satisfied with his response. You can't just go around attacking people. You could have very easily started another war with that action. He then tightened the wires enough to cause the angel to flinch to get her full attention. Believe me, there wouldn't be a war unless I said so. His eyes glowing for added effect, again looking to the sky, which had become more fearsome with tightening the cords around the angel. With a bored sigh, better wrap this up, it'd be a pain in the ass for me and the people of this city if Michael decided to try and pick a fight. Tugging again on the wires somewhat, he gave the angel another harsh glare. Just keep this in mind, and that goes for your brother with his eye in the sky. Odds are you'll be seeing me in the future, and unless you want to know what a real war looks like, I suggest you stay out of my way. The lack on the wires gave way and quickly they disappeared, releasing the sealed angel, who spread her wings wide, breathing with a calmer demeanor. Looking back to where her enemy remained, all she saw were brief wisps of red smoke, his presence otherwise having vanished from sight. A small part of her was tempted to pursue, but her encounter, and the obvious worry her brother had been showing, tempted her to do otherwise. Best to report back to Michael before something else happens. Hopefully we'll be able to keep an eye on this guy and be better prepared in the future. Opening her wings wide, a blinding light forming around her, the angel quickly vanished from sight, the violent storm quickly dissipating as well. Unaware of the horseman, hiding in the shadows. Well, this has certainly been an eventful day. Meant the Gremory ruthless pummeled the Red Dragon Emperor, pissed of Gabriel, and got into a game of chicken with heaven itself. He quietly sighed again as he ran his hand through his hair, his armor and battle gear quickly fading away in order to adopt a more casual look, whilst his aura had effectively vanished, keeping heaven's eye off him for the time being. Let's just hope tomorrow's a little less of a pain in the ass. Scene change, next day in the city. Well, here's a reunion I was hoping to avoid, at least for another few centuries. My luck really sucks this week. Those were the words echoing in the mind of Naruto, aka War, the Red Horseman, who after his encounter with the Gremory girl and Gabriel, opted to adopt a slightly more casual appearance. He still had the same physical appearance of a teen around 17 or 18 with spiky blonde hair, blue eyes, whisker marks and the like. However, his traditional red duster jacket and chain mail armor had been replaced with a simple red jacket with the imprint resembling the marking on his seal emblazoned on the back, with a black t-shirt inside, a pair of army green pants and simple black shoes, along with a black fingerless glove covering his right hand, while his left was exposed, a plain-looking gold ring on his left ring finger, and a black belt with the same symbol on his jacket for a belt buckle. Having decided to wait to see the results of his past antics, the horseman decided to take a stroll through the city, getting a chance to admire and enjoy the peaceful sounds and sights of a relatively calm area for a change, as opposed to the endless parade of violent images of war-torn countries and cities he was consistently stuck viewing as part of his position. It had actually been rather soothing for the otherwise brutal horseman, seemingly forgetting for a moment how bitter things were until he caught sight of something that caused any sense of serenity to die almost immediately. The sight in question was a car, specifically a large black Cadillac Escalade, with a rather interesting front license plate reading the word hungry, and was currently parked outside a local fast food chain restaurant. Normally people would simply see the car as a gas-guzzling vehicle that only rich assholes or people in a midlife crisis drove for one reason or another, but other than mild contempt would give it no mind. For the horseman, however, he knew there was far more to this particular vehicle than met the eye, and unfortunately it meant an encounter he'd hoped to avoid. Casually strolling up to the car, he gave it a quick glance, casually sliding one of his fingers across the passenger side door, noticing a small wisp of black energy forming around it. Sorrow, he sighed. Well, that just confirms what I was afraid of. If you're here, then that means famine's not far behind, is he? He looked again upon the car, watching as another wisp of black energy flew from the car door before being absorbed into his finger, as the car communicated with him. Nodding his head, the horseman quickly turned to the restaurant, and only needed a passing glance to figure things out. Before making his way over, he offered the vehicle one last glance. I know we've got to adapt a little to modern times, but turning your horse into a car, I'm pretty sure being stuck in that form makes even a horse literally named Sorrow miserable. Well, that and famine being as selfish as sure doesn't help. Quickly walking through the doors, War stopped for a brief moment as a familiar sensation entered his being. A vague sense of desire crept into him for the briefest of instances. A desire for food, for drink, for battle, for blood and many more, all coming up to the surface. Thankfully the effect disappeared fairly quickly, too weak to even affect him, but it fully confirmed what he knew to be true. Though if he needed any more proof, he merely had to look around at the patrons. Every single one of them strangely enough seemed to be on an eating binge, all having 2 maybe 3 super-sized orders of food, more than any sane human being would normally ask for. Heck, some of the people in the restaurant were teenage girls, individuals who spent more time starving themselves to death just to look pretty, often looking at such fatty foods as poison, yet there they were, downing fries and burgers like they hadn't eaten in months. War narrowed his eyes, quickly spotting a large chain of black energy wisps, invisible to the humans and many supernatural beings and the like, all tied together and hanging over the building like a smoke cloud. Following the trail, quickly led him to a table by one of the windows, completely covered in at least 6 or 7 trays of food in the largest sizes available. Yet, only a single person was seated. His appearance was in one word: malnourished. Standing around 6'5" or 6 perhaps, he was a surprisingly tall individual, though that only seemed to help emphasize his rather minimal physique. His arms, legs and torso, all had little to no muscle or fat on them, his skin looking somewhat stretched over his body, the bones and even some muscle veins literally being easily visible, as if someone had placed plastic wrap on a skeleton. He had a nearly visible skull made more creepy by his cold black eyes, which appeared as if they were sunken into the sockets, possibly because they were, and rather thin, wispy-looking black hair with a few patches of gray thrown in for good measure. Despite his rather unsettling physique, he seemed to go out of his way to show it off, wearing a white, short-sleeved shirt that he left completely open, only covered by an open black vest, ripped up and dirty gray pants and black shoes, all of which seem a size or two too big, while also showing off more of his weakened physique. One more noticeable feature was a silver ring with a black stone in the center on his right ring finger, and a tattoo of a pair of black scales placed directly in the center of his exposed chest. Currently the individual was in the process of literally gorging himself on fast food, rapidly grabbing burgers and fries left and right, shoving them down his throat, sucking down every last crumb and drop of grease like it was oxygen. It was just one fist full of food after the other, and with no end in sight. Yet despite all the food he was eating, his expression never changed. He didn't look sick, nauseated. Hell, he didn't even look satisfied. He just had that same empty, hungry look in his eyes one would expect from a starving animal. The Red Horseman looked at the man feeding himself, preparing to walk over, when a somewhat raspy voice rang out through the restaurant. "Hello, War. I was wondering when you'd show up." Looking up at Naruto with his void-like eyes, he stopped for a brief moment in the process of shoving a triple-stacked burger down his throat to talk. "Hope you don't mind the location. I desperately needed a snack," and well, he didn't even finish his sentence, just shoving the remains of the burger down his throat without care, grease dripping from his mouth and onto his shirt, yet he remained ignorant. Naruto only sighed at the sight as he made his way over. "Nice to see you too, Famine. Seems your table manners are still horrible." Famine didn't reply to his brother's comment, content to grab another large handful of fries and literally shove them down his throat, his skinny hand actually able to fit itself into his mouth. Crumbs and salt flew in every direct as he crunched down on the fires, showing off his rather yellow and somewhat rotted teeth. Naruto casually made his way over to the table, seating himself across, not saying anything at first as he watched his brother continue to feed himself, looking on in mild disgust at the Black Horseman's complete lack of table manners. The two sat in silence for another few minutes before Famine looked up at the Red Horseman, currently showing impatience. "I don't mean to be rude, dear brother, but if you're going to sit there you might as well order something yourself. I'm in the middle of eating and don't feel up to talking right this second." Naruto frowned at his brother's casual brush off of his presence, more interested in cheap fast food than talking with him. Sadly, this was something he had to expect from Famine. As his name implied, famine was hunger in its purest form, pretty much an endless void that was incapable of being satisfied no matter how much food he devoured, how much liquor he drank, or pretty much anything he did. Naturally, this also made him a massive pain in the ass to talk with, as he was always more interested in curbing his vices than talking. Of course, if you wanted to have a conversation with him, that naturally means sucking it up and be with him, if possible. "Not hungry right now, Famine. I'd rather just settle this discussion and move on." Despite their strained relationship, Naruto was also not such a hothead that he'd just attack any of his fellow horsemen in broad daylight. Unfortunately, his brothers were well aware of this fact, and well, if food isn't what you need, perhaps I could help you acquire some other form of comfort. That one waitress has been looking at you since you entered. Both pairs of eyes quickly locked on to a young employee of the restaurant, a woman around 19 with blue hair and a short ponytail and green eyes, currently giving Naruto a few sideways glances and a small blush on her face. Famine actually smirked at the sight, turning to his brother. one of his hands actually moving away from the food to his ring. Give me a moment, and I can have her so hot under the collar she'd let you do any manner of things to her, right here if you want. His response was some pressure on his stomach from under the table, the barrel of a rather large handgun ready to fire, whilst War looked upon him with a soulless gaze. I see so much as a single skin cell touch that ring and I'll blast the hole through the only organ you actually give a damn about. Famine didn't even react to the threat, content to roll his eyes before returning his hand to the food, feeling the weapon disappear as he did. My dear brother, so much repressed anger. I honestly think a good lay would be beneficial for you. They say nothing relieves stress better, and well, when was the last time you were with a woman? A few thousand years, I believe. You must have a lot of pent-up sexual tension. This time he felt the knife press against him. Only this time it actually broke the skin of his stomach. But again he barely noticed it, remaining unflinching at his brother's now heated gaze. I didn't come here to discuss my personal matters with you, Famine. I'm only here because I assume you want to talk about the current status of things. So may we please move this along? Famine, however, merely chuckled at his brother's attempt to threaten him, enjoying the sight of pushing his buttons, casually picking up another fry. You know, I've never understood why you are so obsessed with protecting humans. They're hardly worth the effort. As he spoke, he moved the fry in his fingers, looking it over with an examining eye. I mean, think about their souls for a moment. They're almost like potato chips, or these fries for example. Sure, they taste good and can be quite addicting, but he quickly slipped the fry in his mouth, before reaching out and getting another handful, as another platter was laid down before him. Even if you eat 100 of them, you're still hungry, and there's hardly any nutritional value to boot. Really, what's the point of it all, if even their soul, the supposed most valuable part of their entire being, isn't worth a little grain of salt? At that point, War pushed the knife completely into Famine's stomach, black liquid actually leaking out of his wound, but thankfully not enough to take any kind of notice. War's gaze becoming fiery at his brother's ironically tasteless comment. Let me be blunt, Famine. You're treading a very thin line and I'm literally out of patience with you. So the next words out of your mouth better relate to what you're doing here or else. With a sideways glance, and putting the fries in his hand down, he let out a bored sigh. You really are high-strung, you know that. He looked down at the knife for a moment. Why are you even stabbing me? You know we can't die and you're just wasting time. Naruto, however, pushed forward somewhat. Maybe because I know it still hurts like hell and I get a degree of enjoyment knowing I can do this to you all day if I want to and you can't stop me. So with that out of the way, tightening his grip on the knife with his eyes glowing red, are you gonna spill your guts for me? Or am I gonna have to spill them all over the floor? Feeling War push the knife in deeper, the Black Horseman related, not too much to say. Death found out about you being summoned to Earth, and since he was too busy to deal with it, and we all know how you Cockney and Pestilence are, he sent me to check things out. Really nothing that surprising. Picking up another burger, he chose to actually take bites instead of swallowing it whole for a change. Of course, us appearing on Earth isn't too strange. As long as there's enough of our respective element, we can appear anywhere. Like me, for instance, normally I need to be in a country where a drought's taking place or be outside of some lonely strip club in order to stay solid, and yet lo and behold, this one city quickly becomes flooded with desires for power, bloodshed, revenge, and a near-endless supply of lust for the flesh. I've actually been able to enjoy myself for a change. Quickly returning to his food and taking a bite out of a burger, he shifted his train of thought towards his brother, and therein lies the main question. Unlike me, you haven't had the means to become solid on Earth since back in the 70s. Yet lo and behold, here you are, solid, full power and all, without any scorched earth or blood-stained buildings. Which leads me to believe there's something interesting going on right now, isn't there? Naruto didn't say anything, eyes darting around the room for a moment, letting out a frustrated growl. Ophis managed to get her hands on my seal and broke it. That's why I'm here. The starving horseman actually found himself silent at the revelation, dropping the fries in his hand in shock. Though his shock didn't remain, opting to shift to a nearby milkshake, which he took a quick sip of before proceeding with his comments. So basically, the Dragon Queen made you her bitch. He then proceeded to take another sip as another thought entered his mind. Pestilence is going to have an absolute field day when he finds out. I wouldn't be surprised if he holds this over your head until the end of days happens. The sound of a gun cocking caught his attention, feeling the knife vanish from his body and shifting back into its gun form, with War obviously a little peeved at the bitch comment. You really think I'd take orders from that pint-sized lizard if I didn't have a choice? She has the other seals and threatened to break them if I didn't comply, and Famine, however, cut him off. So that's it. I always knew your adherence to the rules of Armageddon would come back to bite you in the ass someday. Didn't think it would be Ophis of all people to do it though. At this point Naruto closed his fist and slammed it on the table, shaking the food up, his aura flaring up, actually causing some of the patrons to become more violent than hungry, actually starting to argue with each other over the food. I don't think I need to remind you that the rules are ironclad and we all have to follow them. Creation made that very clear eons ago, and I don't have to tell you what death will do if we did kickstart things early. His mention of the Pale Horseman actually caused Famine to freeze briefly, a bit of sweat actually accumulating on his forehead as he thought back to the Elder Horseman. You're not wrong. Death's always been inflexible when it came to the rules, and I'm not dumb enough to get on his bad side. Besides, wouldn't be worth the effort anyway. At this point, despite there still being plenty of food left, Famine's hand stopped reaching, his face still dirty from the food he'd eaten. Well, guess I've managed to do my duty for now. Old Death's gonna want this input quickly, and the sooner I tell him, the sooner I can hit up another food joint and maybe a nice liquor store while I'm at it. Quickly getting to his feet, the wound from the knife having already healed, he looked at his still sitting brother with his black hole-like eyes peering into him. Quite the situation you've gotten yourself into, War. I'd offer you a hand, but frankly it's none of my business, and even if the apocalypse does start early cause of this, it'd either be your ass or Ophus's in the fire. Plus everyone will be fucked anyway, so it's a win for me regardless. He offered that last bit with disgusting smile and show of his rotten teeth, clearly mocking his brother's position. War was almost tempted to fire off a round directly into his brother's throat, only for him to have already vanished from the spot, a few faint wisps of black smoke remaining. The patrons meanwhile were quickly snapping out of their induced stupor, some looking full, others sick, and some looking outright horrified at what they had been shoving down their throats. Though thankfully, nothing a little antacid couldn't fix. The blonde horseman let out a sigh and slid down somewhat in his seat, trying to relax a little and lower his bubbling anger. I don't know whether I should be pissed off that famine essentially mocked me in front of everyone, or grateful it was him I ran into instead of pestilence. He actually reached over and picked up a fry, munching on the salty stick as he mused to himself. I suppose it's better it was famine. Least he only acts like an ass when it benefits him, as opposed to pestilence, who would have just poisoned everyone here for shits and giggles, along with getting under my skin. Eating a few more fries, the horseman adopted a more serious gaze, contemplating what had happened. Odds are I'll probably have to speak with Death pretty soon. For what good it'll do though. Since Ophus hasn't technically done much, I doubt he'll step in and put an end to this. So I'll probably have to play this by ear for now. He quietly dusted the salt and crumbs off his hands as he prepared to leave. Of course, I'll have to wait a little bit and see how heaven and hell respond to my little excursion with the Gremory girl. Knowing them, it won't take too long for shit to hit the fan, and if not from them, then from someone else. As if one cue, the sound of something hitting glass got the horseman's attention as he quickly turned to the window and looked on with a mild sense of surprise at the sight. Namely, two young-looking girls with their faces pressed against the window, looking upon the remaining food with a similarly ravenous look to Famine's. Their faces were mostly concealed by white cloaks with gold outlines, but he could make out that one girl had long orange hair and twin ponytails with purple eyes, while the other had short blue hair with a few green strands in the front with yellow eyes. Of the two, the blue-haired girl seemed like the more serious of the pair, having a more narrow face and eyes, while the orange-haired girl seemed a bit more bubbly. However, what really drew his attention was a sign in their hands that they'd been pressing against the glass, which read in kanji, "Starving sisters in need of food," which certainly explained the hungry looks on their faces. Taking a quick look at the food and then back at the two girls, he let out another sigh, a little annoyed at the situation, but only a little, waving his hand to signal they could come in, which after they offered up a quick prayer, made their way to the door. From confronting my brother famine, to giving food to starving members of the church. Seems I was right, this city is a supernatural clusterfuck. Red Rider End. Chapter start. The sounds of ravenous consumption and munching permeated through the fast food establishment, with many of the patrons and staff taking quick, odd glances at the two hooded figures, currently devouring the remains of Famine's previous meal, down to the last crumb. He swore some of them were even cheering them on. The Red Horseman similarly just sat there, watching the massive pile of food shrink with each passing nanosecond. His eyes watching with shock as he casually sipped on a large soda he currently had in his hand, with one thought going through his mind: all those times people would stare at me when I ate ramen, suddenly I'm starting to get where they were coming from. He continued to watch over the two, gulp down entire portions, enough to feed the whole three factions, while quietly scanning them over and taking note of the peculiar sign they had been carrying. Have to say, it's not very often you see a pair of nuns begging for food on the side of the road. I mean, I know you guys take a bunch of different vows regarding certain rules and conducts, but I'm pretty sure being fed adequately is something you'd be entitled to, he commented. The girls quickly ceased mowing down all the food in sight before quickly lowering their heads to him. Thank you for sharing your food with us. I feared we'd surely starved were it not for your kindness. The chestnut-colored twin-tailed girl acclaimed. The blue-haired one actually looked up at the horseman with what familiarly looked like stars in her eyes, thankfully not much to the point resembling a fangirl. Truly, we must be blessed by God's grace that he would deliver a savior upon us, thanks be to God. She loudly exclaimed in reverence, earning odd looks from onlookers. Naruto felt a strong urge to chuckle at the irony of the comment but managed to hold his tongue. A God-given savior, the only way that statement could be any less accurate is if I was freaking Surzex or Azazel. Don't worry about the food. My brother was in here not too long ago and decided to leave me without finishing everything he ordered. Didn't think it would be wise to let the food go to waste. The twin-tailed girl, however, merely shook her head as her eyes continued to glimmer like her companion. She abruptly stood up, surprising the other diners. So much generosity and modesty, however, no matter what you say, such act of kindness cannot be overlooked. Then she started to pray, Lord, I ask you show the same kindness to this man as he has to us, Amik. Zenobia, what was that for? She yelped as the blue-haired girl quickly pulled on her twin tail. You're causing a scene, Irina. What part of being discreet is so difficult for you to understand? The blue-haired chided while taking a bite off a hamburger, completely disregarding the fact that she isn't so discreet either. Is this how the exorcists are nowadays? Naruto thought as he surveyed his surroundings and took note of how a mother was steering away the gaze of her child who was pointing at the girls. They probably thought they were some cosplayers or weirdos. He's not really sure which is better. Turning her head, the apparently more mature of the two bowed her head again to Naruto, who continued to look a tad bit uncomfortable at the attention. Please forgive my friend, she's very passionate about her beliefs, and she took a bite off her fourth burger. Isn't very adept at restraining herself in public. Not like you are shining example of etiquette either, he inwardly thought, idly noting the way her cheeks were puffed out, and her mouth was filled to brim with food that he wondered how she can even chew. Gulp. Never mind, she just gulps it down without chewing. It would have been impressive if it wasn't a bit disturbing. Outwardly, however, Naruto simply waved them off. It's perfectly fine. Being praised by a couple of holy women certainly isn't the worst thing in the world, and there's nothing wrong with being passionate about something you are truly committed to. With another smile, he quietly sipped his drink for a moment before asking, anyway, back to my question. Mind if I inquire as to why you two women of the church were apparently starving? While I'm not the most religious person, I'm pretty sure churches usually provide sufficient food to their followers. His comment caused the two girls to quickly drop their heads in shame. It was Zenovia who answered first. We were provided sufficient amount of this land's currency before our arrival. But a certain colleague of mine. At this point Zenovia was more focused on Irina, who shrunk down from her annoyed and accusative stare. Foolishly wasted it all, and thus we had to resort to begging for food from pagan worshippers of all people. Naruto blinked. I see. Mind if I ask as to what exactly you spent the money on? The horseman quickly found a rather peculiar painting now shoved in his face, with Zenovia letting out a huff. My friend here, Irina, decided to purchase this ridiculous piece of third-rate artwork from a scammer, after the salesman conned her into believing it had actual value. Irina, however, quickly pulled the painting back and held onto it like an infant and pouted. I keep telling you, Zenovia, this is a legitimate image of a holy saint masterfully weaved into the canvas by a passionate and inspired holy man. Irina spoke. The sheer zeal and faith in her voice could have convinced Zenovia if not for her following words. That salesman said so. Zenovia then gave her a blank stare that said, Are you serious? Irina huffed. I know, with God as my witness, that this painting is, without a shadow of doubt, an artwork of true cultural and religious. Yeah, that thing's fake. Naruto interrupted. Irina's jaw snapped shut, her head slowly twisting in Naruto's direction, who was looking at the painting with an analytical gaze. Hate to tell you, Irina, but I know a thing or two about art, and that piece you have there is some random second-hand painting, most likely made by some unknown art student or something. I can guarantee you that it isn't worth anything and is likely something people buy to cover up a hole in their walls. At her devastated look, he added, sorry. Not that he was really. The poor girl looked like her entire world had been shattered, as if she was told that God was dead, her lip quivering and tears forming in the corner of her eyes, while Zenovia's own eye was twitching along with her hand. In an instant, she grabbed the now identified useless painting and promptly carried it over to a nearby garbage can and proceeded to shove it down as deep as possible, or so she tried. Unfortunately, the painting was too large for the bin, causing it to awkwardly hit the rim. Her eyes twitched as the canvas refused to fit. Crack, the poor painting was snapped in half. Crack, it was snapped again. Crack and again, crack and again, crack and again, until it was only splinters and small pieces. That was a lot of repressed stuff going on. Not yet done making her point, she quickly grabbed a milkshake from somewhere and poured it all over the broken piece of wood as she glared at it as if it was the most offensive thing in the world. Feeling a bit satisfied, she let out a calming breath as she returned to her seat as if nothing had just transpired. Irina was still devastated by what she heard from Naruto, who had to hold back his urge to laugh at their faces. Zenovia closed her eyes and quietly pinched the bridge of her nose in an attempt to calm herself down, while Irina was now attempting to drown her sorrow in another milkshake. Mirth still prevalent over his features, Naruto said. Okay, now that we've gotten through that cough, little matter what you're doing here. I'm not exactly local to this area, but seeing a couple of foreign nuns here in the Far East is fairly unusual, especially given the fact that the only church I know of in this city is abandoned. Having enough entertainment, Naruto decided to switch to a more serious topic, and it seemed to reinvigorate the pair somewhat, though Zenovia seemed somewhat hesitant to speak. Irina, on the other hand, was almost happy to respond to their benefactor. We've actually been tasked with a very important mission from the church. Specifically, we need to find. She quickly shut herself up when Zenovia glared at her in a manner that basically translated to TMI, with Zenovia turning her gaze to Naruto. Again, you must forgive my friend and myself as well. While we appreciate your kind gesture in rendering aid in our time of need, you must understand this is an important and private matter, and something not meant to be shared openly to outsiders who don't share our views. Naruto frowned lightly at the remark. True enough, he didn't follow the church's rather misguided beliefs, but that had more to do with the fact he actually knew more than them about the truth of the war, and God himself along with the various other deities, and he himself was actually mentioned in the Bible as one of the harbingers of Armageddon. So following the religion would seem pretty odd and even heretical, to say the least. Of course, that didn't mean he couldn't still have an opinion on the current matter. I think I get the idea. Basically, your church, or perhaps God itself, essentially sent a pair of teenage girls to a far and foreign country they are very unfamiliar with, on some kind of secret mission with apparently a limited number of resources. Sounds a tad bit moronic, don't you think? He harshly asked. Zenovia's eyes quickly narrowed at the remark, while Irina still showed herself to be the more vocal. Please, sir, do not talk about the church in such manner. We knew there would be some risks involved when we came here and we accepted, insisted even. Also, I actually grew up in this area, so it's not like we are completely unfamiliar. She reasoned. For a seemingly naive and klutzy girl, she seemed to be the more conversationally versed one, but that still doesn't change the fact that the church condoned sending a pair of underage girls to another country to do something that, frankly, the church should have handled themselves. It seems to me that they are having you do their dirty work and did so apparently, in accordance to God's will. Doesn't exactly give a lot of confidence to him, does it? Irina prepared to fire back with another retort, but Zenovia, who was looking at Naruto with a pretty icy glare, beat her to the punch. You aren't a normal civilian. I am not certain of who you are or whatever heretics you serve, but whatever mission the church gives us is a mission from God himself, and we have sworn to follow his word with no hesitation, no matter the risk or sacrifice. That is our decision, and we follow it willingly until our dying day. By now, it was clear to them that he wasn't a normal civilian but someone who knew about the supernatural. Naruto only smirked, though rather than amusement it was more along the lines of a mixture between mockery and cold disposition. You know, it's funny. I remember the last time fools blindly followed God's supposed words. A little thing happened called the Crusades, and we all know how that little mission from God went now, don't we? Years of war and treachery. Zenovia's glare quickly became frigid and Irina actually looked upset and disapproving at him, but Naruto easily stared the two down without so much as flinching, though without the sense of mockery. Don't misunderstand, I'm not saying that having strong faith in your religion is a bad thing. Every person has the right to adhere to what beliefs they willingly choose. However, when people blindly allow that faith to guide their every decision, it will lead to zealotry and naivety, turning those religious institutes into little more than a glorified cult that opts to slaughter or enslave anyone who doesn't follow their beliefs. After all, how many times has religion been the cause of a war, genocide, or some other form of strife and suffering? A loud bang resounded through the building, with many patrons looking in fear at the now seething Zenovia, whose fist had left a small but noticeable dent in the table, while the other's hand was clamped tightly around the wrapped package she had with her, which Naruto could easily see that it was radiating intense energy, her eyes looking upon him with a look of pure murder. You have shown us kindness in a moment of our desperation, and for that my partner and I are grateful. However, I will not stand by and allow you to heedlessly insult our beliefs or slander the good name of God. Arrogance such as yours must be dealt with accordingly. Naruto, however, only frowned and took a quick look at Irina, who had a similar angry look on her own face. So you want to strike me down simply because of the fact I spoke a few harsh yet truthful words about your beliefs. Yet another evidence of basically using your religion as justification for doing whatever you want. Hardly what I believe God intended for his followers to do. He quietly got up from his seat, taking note of both girls tensing up at his sudden movement. However, if you believe your cause is just and the words I spoke is enough of a crime to warrant violence, then let us do this somewhere where we won't hurt anyone or cause needless destruction. There is a forest nearby where people scarcely visit. Is that venue fine with you? It wasn't a question or request as much as it was a statement, as Naruto was already leaving the establishment. Without another word spoke, the two girls shared a glance and followed Naruto out the restaurant, either aware of just what they'd allowed themselves to be dragged into. Scene change. Well, this is certainly turning into an interesting day. First I have an awkward encounter with famine, and now I'm in a sparring match with a pair of exorcists though. Thankfully at least these girls seem more pleasant than more boring company I've had to keep recently. Naruto's eyes peered at the two girls standing roughly 50 feet away from him, both having discarded their cloaks, revealing themselves to be clad in skin-tight, black leather battle uniforms. Certainly appealing to the eyes, but the horsemen focused more on the weapons they each carried. Zenovia held a massive blade which resembled a claymore, no, more like a Zweihander, with an oddly shaped three-pronged blade and a guard akin to an axe. The blade itself also seemed to be releasing massive amounts of energy, almost roaring as it pulsed with raw power. Meanwhile Irina, who at first didn't seem to have anything resembling a blade on hand, quickly pulled some kind of chain necklace off of her person, which in a flash of light shape-shifted into a Japanese katana. Unlike Zenovia's sword, the energy from her blade wasn't nearly as concentrated or powerful, but more flexible and fluid, without a distinct shape or a feeling of firmness. Excalibur Destruction and Excalibur Mimic, two of the 7 fragments forged from the legendary sword of King Arthur. Naruto looked over both blades with a keen eye. You must be quite exceptional swordsman if the church is willing to entrust you with 2 of their deadliest weapons. Zenovia barely acknowledged the compliment, maintaining her emotionless front as she readied her sword. I'm surprised you even know of these swords to begin with. The fact you're able to identify them at a single glance means you are quite deeply involved in the supernatural. You're clearly no ordinary individual. She searched him for a look of awe or even a hint of fear that even high-class beings would show in presence of the legendary sword, but only found amusement. She gritted her teeth. Naruto merely chuckled at her attempt to intimidate him, reminding him of the little Gremory girl. Let's just say I've got an expertise regarding weaponry. I also made it a point to study up on legendary weapons. Those things pique my interest. Then there is also the fact that it pays to stay informed. After all, one wouldn't know what the future holds. Irina didn't seem nearly as impressed. So he recognizes our swords, it doesn't matter, Zenobia. He spoke ill of God in our presence all while knowing our identities, and for that he needs to pay. Zenobia only nodded as the two prepared themselves for battle. Naruto only looked mildly interested, knowing that whatever they could throw at him wouldn't be enough. The pair looked a bit unnerved by the sheer lack or wariness or fear in their enemy. Now come on, I never actually said anything wrong about God himself or the church. All I said was that the thinking behind your missions was a little backwards. I'm pretty sure just about anyone would back me up on that if they thought about it for more than 2 seconds. Zenobia tightened her grip on her sword. As we had said earlier, we accepted the risks and are fully prepared to give our lives up in the name of God. If sacrifice and danger is the path we must follow, then we will walk it with wholeheartedly. Irina nodded with stride. Praise be to God. Amen. They both chanted. That actually caused Naruto to frown. He raised his hands and then with a blur, he retrieved a pair of branches from a nearby tree. You say you're willing to throw your lives away for the sake of God and the church. Your faith is commendably strong. That much is certain, and having faith is hardly what I would call a mistake. He gripped the 2 sticks, testing its reach and snapping of little stubs, making it less oddly shaped. However, to let that faith blind you to the path you are willing to tread so carelessly to throw your life away was frankly idiotic. I feel that kind of belief system died out with the Crusades. Letting someone else's words rule your lives is a foolish way to go, and if that is what God intends, then I don't see why anyone would follow him. Both sword wielders actually found themselves dropping their guards somewhat at the display, actually questioning the man's sanity. Zenobia the more confused of the two. Does this man honestly think he can match the power of 2 of God's weapons with a pair of sticks? Is he mocking us? With a casual twirl of the sticks, Naruto pointed one of them at his would-be opponents, shifting slightly into a loose stance as he readied himself. Well, what are you waiting for? If your faith in God is truly as strong as you say it is, then you should have no trouble fighting a man only armed with a pair of broken branches with the blades of the legendary Excalibur. Irina, being the faster of the two, immediately charged forward towards Naruto with Excalibur mimic raised. Those who dare mock God shall face his judgment. Naruto shifted his body, barely out of the way of her slash, keeping his own weapons ready, but opting to simply see what skill the girl posed before doing anything else, easily dodging several swings and slashes that followed, much to the girl's frustration. Would you hold still? I can't punishment you if you keep dodging me like this. Naruto actually had to hold back a chuckle at the amount of conviction at which she spoke that line. Wow, didn't peg you as the dominating type. Doesn't that go against your religion? It doesn't. She replied almost automatically before her face lit up like a thermometer at Naruto's words, her stance quickly becoming much less refined. Though that was only until steam started coming out of her ears as she suddenly began attacking with a greater deal of ferocity. How dare you make such an accusation? I would never even consider doing something as vile as that. Naruto continued to laugh at her obvious frustration. Come on now, everyone needs to relieve stress every now and again, and I'm not going to judge you for it. Also, the black leather dominatrix outfit spoke otherwise. Irina was now pretty much foaming at the mouth at his blatant wisecracks, continuing to swing even more wildly than before. Not helping the matter was the ease at which her opponent seemed to dodge her attacks. She quickly shifted to try and cut him down with another slash only for him to easily move out of the way and to add insult to injury. Lightly smacked Irina in the back of the head, causing her to lose her balance and nearly fall forward. The exorcist rubbed her sore head before glaring at her enemy in anger. Will you take this seriously? Before attempting another wild, horizontal slash, only to find her opponent nowhere to be found. Her eyes promptly began scanning the area, her senses on alert as she tried all manner to find her adversary. You want me to take this more seriously? Well, I suppose if that's what you want, I'm more than willing to accommodate you. Irina turned around to try and find Naruto, yet still couldn't spot him. Yet she could feel his eyes trained on her from all directions. Zenobia similarly having her own guard up, keeping a close eye on the fight. Let's start this little spar by going over what I've pieced together from your overall fighting style, which frankly leaves a lot to be desired. Irina actually twitched at the crack and got even more insulted when he implied that the fight hadn't started when she started attacking. She tried scanning for her opponent, but saw nothing. She flinched as a finger lightly tapped her shoulder. Found you. Quickly reacting, she slashed in the direction, only to find she'd hit nothing but empty air. Your weapon indicates that you favor a more speed-based style of combat, relying on combination of your agility along with swift and precise strikes to bring down your enemy. However, you are far too emotional in battle. You let your entire style become unbearably sloppy the second I made a single wisecrack. Imagine if I'd been a real enemy. 2 more hits struck Irina on the shoulder as she continued to try desperately to hit him, or rather hit any hint of his presence. Her movements began showing her desperation and paranoia was gnawing her mind. Zenobia meanwhile becoming increasingly impressed with how easily the man was dominating Irina in spite of her speed and technique, which is truthfully better than hers. And let's talk about Excalibur mimic for a second. I don't deny that someone with a powerful weapon like that can be a force to be reckoned with, but only if they know how to use it properly, something you clearly don't know how to do. Your sword is the blade of mimicry, meaning it can shape-shift and give you an incredible range and extreme adaptability, potentially allowing you to manipulate the blade only limited by your imagination, Just thinking of the possibilities such a blade can offer is staggering. You can turn it into a Zweihander, then a mace next, or even a spear depending on the situation, and yet, Irina didn't even have a chance to react as she found herself struck in the abdomen by a particularly strong strike that sent her skirting across the grass before her body stuck against a tree. As she lurched, she didn't even get a chance to fall, as a sharp tugging sensation was felt on her scalp. Her head turned and her eyes quickly widened as she looked and saw the source of her pain. Her twin tails, something she prided herself in, were currently pinned to the tree. One of the two makeshift weapons her opponent was using had embedded both into the tree by her hair bands. How a flimsy branch can pierce such a thick trunk, she didn't know. Before she could ponder upon it, she felt another pressure on her body, specifically the throat. And thus we come to realizing my point. Irina turned her eyes, without moving her head to avoid the pain of pulling out her hair, finding Naruto's other branch placed at her throat, pointing directly at her artery where a strike could be fatal. She knew that her opponent was faster than her, and based on how she was pushed quite far back earlier, possibly stronger than Zenobia, which means that he could easily pierce her throat and not even Zenobia would be able to stop him. Knowing that fact, her heart nearly stopped and her spine shivered as she caught her opponent's cold eyes. Naruto looking upon her with a calculating gaze that actually made the girl shrink, making her feel like she was back at the institute where she was suffering before Griselda's hellish and brutal tutelage, only 10 times worse. Never did she think that a piece of wood could have been a threat to her life until now, and based on the look on the man's eyes, he could easily kill her at the slightest whim, and she could not do anything about it. Had you utilized Excalibur Mimic's shape-shifting, you could have reformed it into a long metal whip to cut down the trees around us to extend your range, and hit me, or even turn it into shorted blades so you won't be limited with the space, and even use it for defense if need be. That weapon has few limits regarding shape and size. All you have to do is think. See what I'm getting at? He grinned good-naturedly, though his eyes contrasted it with its frigidness. She didn't respond, too frozen in fear to even think of formulating a reply. I said, see what I'm getting at? Impossibly, his grin seemed to get larger, and her breath hitched his eyes. The young teen only nodded in response. It was pathetic, how subdued her stance was, or how she shook and flinched at every perceived movement. Even Zenobia, who was also frozen at the sudden situation, was a bit surprised at sheer terror prevalent on her companion's feature. Naruto then proceeded to pat her head as if she was some stray, which caused the girl to jolt in response. Good girl, just keep that in mind the next time you fight. May end up saving your life in a situation far less unforgiving than I am. He proceeded to remove the wooden weapon from her throat, and he turned his attention to Zenobia. Now then, I believe it's your turn. Care to see how your Excalibur destruction matches up to my deadly stick? He mockingly did a few skillful spins and twirls with the stick to add emphasis. Hey, wait a minute, aren't you Irina, who had her hair stuck in the tree, began to complain. Yes? Meet she could only mewl in fear as she shook her head in negative. Help me out of this tree is what she wanted to say, but to see his gaze at her with those eyes, the word got stuck on her throat. Now that Naruto's attention was back to Zenobia's, Irina only quietly moaned as she tried to pull the stick that currently had her leashed to the tree, but try as she might, it was wedged in good. Without looking, Naruto commented, Nope, you can stay there and watch for a bit. Keeping you pinned like that ensures you won't miss anything as I lecture the other brat. Think of this as extra credit training. The girl's jaw dropped at his remark, and slumped downwards in defeat only to yelp in pain once she remembered she was currently pinned to a tree. Zenobia steadily moved in a circle around her opponent, keeping her eyes glued to his so she could react quickly. Just so you know, I won't fall for the same trick as Irina. Between the two of us, I'm the better swordsman. While Irina had the advantage in speed and technique, it wasn't that overwhelming compared to Zenobia, who also had more strength, stamina and experience. Those advantages were how she won most of their spars. Irina muttered something lightly at the comment while Naruto merely chuckled at his opponent boast. Oh ho, confident are we? Certainly, of the two weapons, Mimic may require more complexity and imagination. Excalibur Destruction, however, is one that needs more refined control and strength. Obviously they wouldn't give it to just anyone lacking in those areas. So compared to your companion you must be just as good or better, of course. Don't presume that simply because you are stronger than your friend, that you can still best me. Tightening the grip on her weapon, Zenobia geared up to make her attack. He's certainly fast. I'll give him that, but Excalibur Destruction has a wide attack range with enough strength that the trees would be more of an obstruction of vision than actual obstacle. So long as I see an opportunity, I'll quickly get in close and then I should be able to hit him even if he does move. Promptly focusing energy into the blade, the exorcist made her way towards her opponent, who was still spinning his own makeshift weapon, now opting to simply balance the piece of wood on his finger, yet it still spun like a helicopter blade. With each step the blade began to glow brighter and brighter. Just a few more steps and I'll be within striking distance, then I'll show him just how strong this sword really is. He will regret underestimating me. Now. Once she saw that Naruto was close enough to be in her attack range, she immediately leaped forward, making sure that her reach was long, that even if her opponent jumps back, he would still be at least gravely injured. She smirked in victory as she swung her sword horizontally. And now, taste the power of God's wrath, she bellowed. As the blade neared its target, Zenobia could only watch slowly in fascination as the stick Naruto had been spinning immediately stopped its rotation as Naruto firmly grasped it in his hand, looking her dead in the eyes with the same cold and disappointed look he'd given Irina. She could see the resemblance with her guardian/mentor's faint yet arctic smile with equally frigid gaze which normally follows with a lesson with her long time and frequent second mentor pain. Funny thing about wrath is Naruto's voice shook her out of her thoughts. She looked in front and saw nothing. It makes your attack sloppy, predictable, and most importantly his voice trailed on as the panic and paranoia shook her within. Before she could even look around, a sharp pain shot from her wrist all throughout her arm, causing her grip on the sword to weaken and the blade to slowly slip through her gradually numbing fingers. Easily, a voice behind her said. She would have looked behind, but in that instance, the weapon which had been pulsing with massive amounts of holy energy, enough to slice through 5 meters of trees, had fallen towards the ground. Exploitable. To Zenovia's immense horror, a powerful light was released, as the energy unspent in the unfinished strike was discharged in the ground, causing it to rupture and dirt to fly in every direction. Zenovia herself was flown backwards into a nearby tree. The solid thud of her body hitting the hard oak resounded through the woods as Irina watched in shock. She muttered a light gasp of pain as she coughed small amounts of blood from the impact. With her eyes barely open she looked at Naruto. The old warrior looked upon the weapon his opponent had dropped with intrigue, as the blade was now sticking out in the middle of a crater one could fit a large dumpster or small car in. The problem you have with your weapon is that you rely too heavily on its destructive power, and not enough on your own. You thought I was underestimating you, but in the end you were just overestimating yourself. You could have safely contained that energy, however, in your haste and eagerness to strike me down immediately, disregarded your own safety and how to properly utilize your weapon. Even if I didn't disarm you midway I would have ducked, which I did, therefore dodging the attack wholly, with its range and destructive power overpassing me completely. He spoke as Zenovia looks up in silence. He continued, you wield a massive blade, which means the build-up speed of the attack is noticeably slower without the use of gravity to accelerate, which is the standard strategy with heavy weapons such as yours. If you did a downward slash, then even if it misses, it could have damaged me in the same way you were, being thrown back by the sheer destructive power you put in your own weapon. The reason I was able to defeat you here was because, while your sword was stronger, mine was quicker and more maneuverable. There is also the fact that since the start of our little lesson, I can already see the end result. I knew exactly where to strike on your arm to turn all that power against you, and that was all that was needed to defeat you. He knelt down to her level as Zenovia listened to his every word in daze. You have a legendary weapon only a few has the honor to wield, and yet you held on it as you had held on your faith, completely blind, controlled and guided by it. Take that away and all, even yourself, would see how blind you truly are, and that in and of itself is why you should never rely on a weapon alone. He raised her chin with his fingers as he lectured. You must be the master of your weapon, never allow the weapon to master you. Don't just follow it, hear it so that you may understand it. Don't just control it, work with it so that the sword may trust you as you would trust it. Do you understand? He asked Zenovia with a smile to which she just dumbfoundedly nodded. Both Zenovia and Irina couldn't even think straight, as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. The two of them had come to Japan armed with some of the strongest weapons in history, fully confident that they could handle any challenge that came their way, even the supposed fallen angel thief. After all, they had eliminated their fair shares of those angels that fallen out of God's grace. But less than a few days there, this stranger, with nothing but a pair of ordinary sticks, managed to humiliate them despite their training, talent, and more importantly the legendary Excaliburs the church has bestowed upon them. More than that, he'd done so with such ease, and that was what truly unsettled the girls. They had fought against masters before, Griselda more than others, and had been defeated by them many times. Yet there was something different about this man, from his posture, to the very aura he emitted. They wondered how they didn't pick that up from the first time they met. It wasn't magical power nor spiritual power. It was clear he possesses power beyond them, to the point they couldn't even see the bottom of that endless pit of pure martial prowess. It wasn't a type of energy, but more like an aura of experience and proficiency. It was as if he was on a completely different plane of existence from even their mentors, top exorcists of the whole church from every branch and order. Jay, just who are you exactly? You know more about combat than you let on, as simply the fact you know what the Excalibur fragments are proves you're no ordinary man. So answer me, just who are you? Zenovia stuttered out in demand. Naruto merely looked at Zenovia with a casual glance, before looking at Excalibur destruction. Without even hold back, he wrapped his hand around the blade and Irina and Zenovia's breath hitched. Like King Arthur before him, easily unsheathed the mighty sword from the earth, unburdened by its weight or power, both girls only able to look upon the majestic sight in shock. With a few test swings, Naruto looked upon Zenovia, with a gaze that told her all she needed to know. Let's just say I'm an old soldier who's seen more combat than anyone ever should, and I try my best to prevent pointless bloodshed if I can, and passing on a few bits of information as well, just to help from time to time. As he spoke, he tossed the Excalibur back to Zenovia, who managed to catch the sword by its handle as Naruto walked up to the two, focusing his gaze on Irina, who shrunk under his stare. Without a word, he easily pulled his other makeshift sword from the tree, allowing Irina the freedom to fall to her knees and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Naruto promptly began walking away, either girl able to get a single word out. Thankfully Naruto was able to let out some parting words. Don't be too discouraged. You are both perfectly capable swordsmen for your age, and trust me, I've seen worse, far, far worse. You can only grow from this experience, as you should. Every defeat is a lesson, another step to attain victory, unless, of course, when you either fail to learn from it, or while you die. Just remember what you learned here today. He stopped walking for a second, with Zenobia actually attempting to stand and trying to find some words to say to the ancient warrior, yet couldn't. Her thoughts also quickly died as Naruto turned his head, revealing a bright and radiant smile on his face, completely contrasting his serious and cold demeanor from before. It was an honest pleasure meeting you girls. I've been having a somewhat tiring day, and this was a pretty fun way to entertain myself. Hopefully we can have an actual fight after you've polished your skills some more to the point where you could actually hold your ground. I'd be happy to give you another lesson. Till then, Ja-any. In a single red flash he was gone, leaving the two girls frozen in place, unable to say a word to each other. Zenobia, however, who had managed to stand up prior, now found her knees quaking and quickly returned to the ground, feeling as though a massive weight had been pressing down upon her. A mixture of fear and awe was pulsing through her body as her heart was beating faster. Those eyes, it was like staring into an ancient text. Inherent wisdom and power beyond comprehension, hidden behind a simple visage. Looking at the area in which the warrior once stood, Zenobia unintentionally tightened the grip of her sword, with its blade glowing brightly again. Those were the eyes of a true master of the blade. One for whom the sword is not a weapon, but one with them, as if their very soul was that of swords. To receive even a praise from someone like that is a great honor. Using her sword, the exorcist managed to stand again, despite her legs still shaking, Irina similarly managing to rise again. We will meet again and I will take your words to heart. Quickly turning her attention to Irina and adopting a deadpan expression at the sight of her partner now gently stroking her hair as if it were an injured pet. Sadly it seems Irina might have missed a little bit of your lesson, master. She quickly shook off any shame she might have been feeling and grabbed the pigtailed exorcist by the collar of her bodysuit. Eep. Hey. Zenobia, stop that, you're choking me, Irina complained. We've spent too much time on this distraction. We need to start making real progress and gather some intel on the stolen Excalibur fragments. Irina quickly managed to pull herself free, pouting at Zenobia's violent display. I know, but first can we stop by my old friend's house? You promised we'd do that back when we first got here. After what happened with the painting, you really expect me to let you guide us into another misadventure? Hey! You made the promise before that happened, and that's not the point. Anyway, this'll be different. I know for a fact Issei still lives in the same house as he did when we were still kids, so we can't possibly get lost. That ditzy and airhead face could have fooled me, she thought, and yet I'm still not even remotely confident in your directional abilities. Too bad, you promised me and swore to God you'd honor that promise, so we're going and that's that. Zenobia actually had to keep herself from swearing at the mention of that promise, while Irina smugly smiled at her apparent victory. If there was ever a time our most benevolent God would give me a chance to break a promise said in his name, this would probably be it. Zenobia thought as she asked her companion, does he even remember you? Of course he will, Irina pondered. Well, probably. Zenobia paused, incredulous look on her face. Probably? Well, when we were still children I used to be more tombish. What? Scene change. After his encounter with the two exorcists, the horseman saw fit to remain in the woods for a few days, comfortable to sit and wait for Ophus's next order. He knew she'd come eventually, and until then he was content to simply sit and wait. Those girls really were a pleasant distraction, certainly more enjoyable than meeting with Famine and that Gremory girl. Then again, so was Custer's last stand, a brief bit of entertainment. The horseman casually made his way through the forest, taking in the quiet serenity of the nature that surrounded him, calming what little rage still resided within him. Yet there was still a lingering thought that he could not as easily quell. It's only a matter of time before I have to step in again with Little Red. I can tell something big is going to happen and Ophus is somehow involved. He paused to take a glance through the trees that otherwise blocked his view of the town. Since his arrival, Naruto had been able to easily keep track of the numerous energy signatures present in the city. Most of them were nothing to brag about, with the Gremory girl being strong enough to be noticeable but still barely a spark. Even her queen was stronger than her. Currently, only a handful of people in the immediate area were of any significance, one of which was Azazel, whom the horseman knew was too lazy and preoccupied with his own interests to cause trouble, while the other was a different story. The horseman decided to stop for a moment as he took a seat at a nearby tree branch, allowing himself to concentration his sensing abilities, and the energies quickly began to flare across the city like signal fires. Kokabeel, an exasperated sigh escaped his lips. I knew that blood-crazy bird couldn't keep his ass in the nest. And wouldn't you know it, Azazel is completely useless as usual, content on just watching his wayward underling trying to start something. Why is it so hard for the three faction leaders to keep their people in check? Zealots, traitors, warmongers. The horseman continued to sit as he debated what course of action to take, seemingly unaware of a pair of eyes peering at him from the shadows. At least that's what the observer would have liked to say, if he didn't quickly feel Naruto's eyes trained directly upon, peering through all the obstacles around them. If that is your idea of being sneaky, you need to learn again. My sensory abilities are second to none, even when I'm not giving it my all, so trying to sneak up on me is pretty pointless. The rider sat up with a more serious and intimidating posture, all the while cracking the fingers in his right hand. While I'm not particularly bothered by your presence, I'm just not fond of being spied on, especially with all the crap I've had to deal with in the last couple of days. As if in conjunction with the whole forest, the spectator went silent. Silence, huh? Normally, people like you get drowned in a seas of weapons. He quickly closed his hand into a fist. However, I recently had an encounter with some people that actually put me in a better mood, and lucky for you I'm not the type of guy who goes in guns blazing unless I have to. So instead, in a split second his fist was raised, and before the observer could blink his hand proceeded to shift forms into what appeared to be orange smoke, which blew by the foliage the stalker hid behind. The cloud quickly engulfed the plants, and Naruto himself watched as they rapidly began to shrivel up and die. With a quick flick of the wrist his hand promptly returned to its original shape, as he gazed into the smoke. That's Agent Orange, in case you're wondering. Nice little chemical defoliant the US used during Vietnam. Cleared entire forests with the stuff, and that's without giving it a little enhancement. The unfortunate foliage that had been hit by the cloud quickly withered and rotted instantly as the cloud hung over them. What few tree remained standing now resembled twigs, barely able to hold their minuscule weight, as the clouds slowly dissipated. Naruto briefly looked over the destruction, with a hard gaze, a weapon that, with enough quantity, would be capable of wiping out entire ecosystems in minutes. Not something I'm crazy about using, but it's good for playing hide and seek. His eyes quickly darted to another nearby tree where the spy had retreated to. Of course, there were more useful, or even more destructive way of rooting the rat out, but he opted for the quicker and more subtle method that didn't require making the landscape resemble the Western Front. His hand quickly turned into its gaseous state, ready to fire again at his spy. Now we can play this game of cat and mouse and end up with you being captured and more than a good chunk of these woods being destroyed. But I'm pretty sure you don't want that any more than I do, so let's be civil and talk savvy. There was silence in the air, though he could tell the spy was plenty fazed by his little display if the rustling in the brush was anything to go by. A second later a black house cat with bright yellow eyes appeared out of the trees, meowing at his presence. Said cat quickly jumped back in fright as a loud gunshot rang through the forest, with a scorched hole in the ground forming not 3 inches from where the feline had been standing. Yeah, a normal cat managing to avoid being gassed by jumping place to place in rapid succession. Don't think you can fool me with that innocent little animal bullcrap. Naruto currently held a smoking, red, flintlock in one hand, finger still on the trigger. So how about you stop this extremely poor attempt at espionage, before I decide to test out the rest of the firearms from the 16th century. The cat seemed all too willing to comply. Her form quickly grew in size, standing on 2 feet and eventually formed into an extremely voluptuous woman clad in a black kimono with red highlights, a yellow obi sash and black sandals. Her eyes matched her original cat form, golden slitted eyes. Her long, wavy black hair fell on her shoulder and chest as her tail snaked its way out from under the dress. My, and here I thought you warrior types believed in chivalry. Pointing a weapon like that at a young innocent maiden like me, ufufu, how shameful. She attempted to follow her comment with a seductive gaze, only for her tail and ears to stiffen at the sound of yet another explosion near her feet, the horseman now holding a blunderbuss in place of the original flintlock. She didn't even see him change his weapon. Yeah, funny thing is that whole chivalry concept? It pretty much died out with the Dark Ages. I don't give a shit what gender you are. You pull any kind of crap with me and I'll get medieval on you all the same. I'm not sexist regarding violence. With another flick of the wrist his weapon retreated into his body, as he stared down the attempted seductress. So did Opha send you, or are you just following me to test out the whole 9 lives theory? The cat only offered a pout as her response, obviously not happy that her usual seduction shtick didn't work. Ophis was right when she mentioned how trigger-happy you are. You really need to loosen up, otherwise life isn't any fun. She leaned forward, showing her very generous bust as she smiled lasciviously. I, for one, know something more fun to do with your big guns, purr. The expression on Naruto's face could only be described as what the fuck, before molding into one of disgust at the mention of Ophis. Enough jokes, what does she want? Her frown turned into a pout as she shook off her playful demeanor. Her expression became more serious. Well, she heard about your little encounter with the Gremory girl earlier. While she thought it was satisfactory for the moment, she had hoped you'd be a little more brutal. I had her entire peerage assault her, and threatened to blow her up with a mini-nuclear bomb. What did Ophis want me to do? Be like Caligula and force her to drink blood from one of her friend's skulls? The Nico merely shrugged. Well, it doesn't really matter right now, since you've still got plenty of opportunities. In fact, according to one of our insiders, she'll soon be coming to blows with a particularly powerful individual soon. Perfect chance to make an impression. You mean Kokabeel, Mr. I won't rest until my wings are completely drenched in the blood of my enemies. Yeah, I'm aware of what he's up to, and it's no surprise he wants to stir up trouble. Guys more blood-hungry than Attila the Hun and Vlad the Impaler combined. At least those guys had some goal or justification in mind. All Kokabeel wants in war is to curb his boredom. The horseman's face hardened along with his fist, taking a quick look into Kokabeel's motivation. And I'm not gonna let the bird brain rip this world apart simply because he doesn't have the forethought to get a hobby like normal people. Kuroka just shrugged. The horseman sat up, turning his attention to the school, sensing the power clash that was soon to happen in the coming days. So let me guess, Ophis is hoping I'll step in and maybe cause a little havoc, enough to get the factions to completely zero in on me. That would be the desired result, she admitted. With an annoyed sigh the horseman stood up from where he'd been sitting, dusting himself off before cracking his neck to loosen himself out. Guess I shouldn't complain too much about this. Might not be fond of Office, but at least this time I'm taking a serious crack at someone who's been begging for a nice nuke. Between their eyes. Without a word, the horseman quickly shifted into his red mist form and flew off towards the school. Chapter end. What if Naruto Reborn as Great Red in High School DxD? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel. And leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.